Welcome, everyone. I know you're listening to this story to fall asleep. So before we start, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment where and what time you're watching. Now, get comfortable and relax. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick and stale. He stood there towering, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. His features were long and slender, limbs stretched unnaturally. His arms hung low, fingers almost grazing his knees. His legs, thin and bone-like, made him stand at an impossible 12 feet tall. His mouth stretched wide, too wide. An unnatural stretched mouth that revealed nothing but a black void inside. His eyes, deep and hollow, were pits of endless darkness, a void that seemed to pull everything in. I don't remember how it got there or how it even got inside. All I know is I locked it deep in my basement where it couldn't come out. Well, that was until I found the basement door wide open. "Hello," I said, staring into the dark basement that yawned open before me. My voice felt small, swallowed by the shadows below. Fear crawled up my throat, thick and sour like I might throw it up. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking. Then I heard it, soft, rattling noises from the kitchen. Gentle, deliberate, like something was moving in there. Something was in the house with me. I moved deliberately, each step slow and careful. My breath caught in my throat. I watched my surroundings, making no noise as I crept toward the kitchen. And then I saw it. The creature from my basement stood at the sink, its towering frame hunched awkwardly beneath the ceiling. It stared out the window, motionless, its long, slender limbs hanging at its sides. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, like it belonged. My heart slammed against my ribs as I bolted for the front door, feet barely touching the ground. I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to. The roar came first, splitting the air like a thunderclap. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was deep, raw and wrong, vibrating through my bones, rattling my teeth. My legs nearly gave out from the sound alone, but fear shoved me forward. I hit the door hard, bursting into the cold night air. My car was just ahead, parked in the driveway. My keys. I needed my keys. My hand dove into my pocket, fingers trembling as I fumbled them out. Behind me, the door exploded open with a splintering crack. Heavy, unnatural footsteps pounded against the ground, fast, too fast. I didn't have to see it to know it was coming. I could feel it closing the distance. I reached the car, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. My hands shook so badly the keys slipped from my fingers and hit the floor mat. No, no, no. I grabbed them again, forcing the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, the sound of death. The creature lunged from the doorway, its long, bony limbs propelling it forward in a blur of twisted movement. It was nearly to the car. The engine roared to life. I slammed the gear into reverse, tires squealing as I stomped the gas. The car jolted backward, throwing me against the seat as the creature lunged, just barely missing the hood. Its empty black eyes locked onto mine for a split second, burning into me before I peeled out of the driveway. I didn't stop. My foot stayed pressed to the floor, the car flying down the long, dark street. The night swallowed everything around me, but I didn't care where I was going, as long as it wasn't back there. Days passed. I barely slept, holed up in a cheap hotel on the edge of town. The room smelled like old cigarettes and stale air, but it didn't matter. It had 4 walls and a locked door. Every night I checked the window, just to be sure. That night was no different. I pulled back the curtain, heart already racing before I even looked. The parking lot below was empty, streetlights flickering weakly against the dark. For a second, I let myself believe I was safe. Then I saw it. Beyond the lot, past the stretch of cracked asphalt and the rusted chain-link fence, the woods began, thick, black trees rising like jagged teeth. And there, just at the edge where the trees met the night, it stood. The tall, twisted figure. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It only stared, watching me from the shadows. It found me. In an instant, I yanked the curtains shut, heart slamming against my ribs. My breath came in quick, shaky bursts. I sprinted to the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway outside was empty, still and quiet. I didn't know how fast it was. I didn't know how smart it was. But it found me. Hours crawled by. The TV droned on in the background, some late-night sitcom I wasn't paying attention to. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see it again. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, just a soft, deliberate tapping. My head snapped toward the door, dread sinking like a cold weight in my chest. Who the hell could that be? I slid off the bed, feet hitting the floor. Before I reached the door, I heard it. A voice. Hello. I need help. Help me. Help me. I need help. Help me. It didn't sound right. It was flat, robotic, like a bad recording played over and over. No emotion, no urgency. I froze, my throat tightened. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police, I shouted, voice trembling. The voice didn't stop. Help me. I need help. Open the door. Open the door. Open the door. It wasn't even yelling, just that same lifeless, droning tone. That was the worst part. The calmness, like it wasn't asking, like it was telling. My hands fumbled for my phone. I dialed 911, fingers shaking so hard I almost hit the wrong numbers. The voice stopped. My stomach twisted. It was like it knew. The operator answered. I explained everything. The voice, the knocking, the thing in the woods. My words tumbled out fast, frantic. We'll send someone, they said, but it might take a few hours. A few hours. My heart sank. My hand shook so badly the phone nearly slipped from my ear. I didn't hang up. I didn't move. I just stared at the door, waiting. Out of fear, I asked, Could you just stay on the line until they come? I don't want to be alone. At first, she hesitated. I'm sorry, sir. We can't do that. We have to answer other calls. Please, I cut in, my voice trembling. Please, I don't think I'll make it if I'm alone. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Then, quietly, she said, Okay. I'll stay. Relief washed over me, but it didn't chase the fear away. My eyes stayed locked on the door. Her voice was calm, gentle. My name's Rachel. What's your name? I swallowed hard. It's James. All right, James, I'm here with you. You're not alone. My throat tightened. Thank you. I think it's still out there. Can you still hear the voice? She asked softly. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. Number? It stopped when I called you, but the way it sounded. I paused, shuddering at the memory. It wasn't normal. It was like robotic, repeating itself over and over. Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, You're doing great, James. Just stay with me. The officers are on their way. I nodded again, trying to steady my breathing. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet wasn't a good thing. It felt like the calm before something worse. Rachel's voice came through the phone again, steady but a little more serious. James, who's chasing you? Can you describe them? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat felt tight, like the words got stuck halfway up. I don't know, I said finally. It wasn't a lie, not really. It's tall, really tall. Its arms are too long, its mouth. My voice trailed off. My mind replayed that black void, the hollow eyes. My stomach twisted. Too long? Rachel asked gently. James, are you saying it's someone wearing a mask or... No, I cut in, my voice cracking. It's not a mask. It's not human. The line went quiet for a moment. I heard her breathe in. James, she said slowly, carefully. Are you sure? Could it be someone in a costume, maybe? Sometimes when we're scared, our minds... I know what I saw, I snapped, louder than I meant to. My voice echoed off the hotel walls, and I flinched at how desperate I sounded. Rachel didn't react. She stayed calm. Okay, I believe you. You're doing great, James. Just stay with me, all right? The officers are still on their way. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. My eyes stayed locked on the door. I couldn't tell her the truth, not all of it. If I said a monster crawled out of my basement and followed me to a hotel, they'd think I lost my mind. Maybe I had. But the thing outside, the voice, it wasn't in my head. It was real, and it wasn't gone. An hour passed in what felt like seconds. The room was still, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong. My pulse thudded in my ears, every breath a battle against the rising panic. Rachel's voice kept me tethered to reality, her calm words a thread I clung to. Then, suddenly, a knock at the door. Knock, knock. I froze. The hairs on my neck stood up. Hello, this is the police. Open the door. This is the police. Open the door. A wave of relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone. Finally, the officers were here. I rushed to the door, heart pounding in my chest. I glanced at my phone to make sure I hadn't missed anything, and there it was. The call still connected, Rachel's voice as steady as ever. James, stay calm. They're on their way. I could hear the muffled voice of the officer outside, repeating the same line. The door was within reach. I grabbed the handle, yanked it open, ready to let in the safety of the police. But there it stood, the creature. It towered, its limbs unnaturally long, bent in sickening angles, its black, empty eyes locked onto mine. The grin that stretched across its face was wide and chilling, too wide. I looked down at my phone in my trembling hands. The screen read, 911. What's your emergency? A smile twisted across the creature's face. It wasn't the officer. It never was. I staggered back, my blood running cold. My stomach dropped into a pit of icy dread, and then it hit me. Rachel never asked for my location. I had never been on the phone with the police. I had been talking to it. God help me. Right as I had finally memorized and grown accustomed to the noises each step my mother and father make in our home. The night sky had decided to come forth, and the scorching sun took its ray of light and heat to slumber, and so did we. I go in my room and turn the lights off. As I was coming closer to my bed, the sound of me, my mother and father's footsteps could be heard echoing across the house. We all had gone to sleep. It was 3 a.m. That is the time when I woke up to a strange, loud noise, followed by the sound of footsteps. Petrified and half awake, I stayed in bed, hiding under the sheets, ears open to hear any sound that was coming from downstairs. That is, when I realized those were not the footsteps of anyone I know. Realization hit me, followed by fear, and a chilling feeling that gave me the shivers. I could hear him, or her. You can't really tell who or what it was. All you could hear was its footsteps, and that it isn't Mom nor Dad. Knock, knock. My eyes open wide. I am now wide awake, taking a peek from under my sheet. The sound of knocking is at my door, but who could it be? Even though the room was dark, it was almost as if you could even see the door trembling with each knock. Knock, knock. That thing behind the door kept knocking. Me, as I am wide awake now, cowering in fear under my sheets, couldn't even move to answer the door. And to be honest, even if I could, I don't think I'd have the courage to. I could feel my heart sinking, my lungs breathing heavily as fear began seeping into me. Knock, knock. The thing was persistent. Then I look at the time. It was an old clock that has always been in my room ever since we moved in. 3:05 a.m. I look in shock. Only 5 minutes have passed. How can this be? Knock, knock. Driven by shock and frustration, I decide to accept my fate. The paralyzing fear had calmed down, still shivering from the unknown that was waiting for me behind that door. Knock, knock. I hop out of bed, wearing my pajamas. Yes, those pajamas my mom and dad bought me a couple of weeks ago. I was wondering if this is the end for me. Will I ever wear those pajamas again? My hand, cold as ice due to loss of blood circulation in my hand, reaching out for the door handle. The cold breeze in the room from the open window I forgot to close before I went to sleep. My eyes drifting everywhere, wondering what to do. I opened the door, and there it was. A dark, humanoid figure. I was rather young, so at the time I thought it was my dad, since it looked like a man, in his 30s. Foolish little me felt a sense of relief, and at the same time, curiosity. Why could I not tell it was my dad? Why is he just standing there, in the darkness? Many questions, many possible answers. But one thing was clear. That thing was not my father. Little me, so young and foolish, jumps at it, joyfully yelling out, "Dad, Dad, you scared me." Alas, the thing did not respond. Instead, all I could feel was its cold body. It almost didn't even feel like a body, as it was not human, more like a manifestation, a pretender. There was no heartbeat, no breathing. Actually, it did breathe, but its lungs didn't move. It was as if looking at a deaf person who could breathe and move. Young me at that time had realized that was no human, or at least not one that I was familiar with at my young age. And now that I'm older, I'm sure you and me both realize that there really are no humans like that. Shocked from what I had just witnessed, I rushed to my parents' rooms as I noticed that thing was just standing there, focused on my room. Yet to my surprise, as I reached the stairs, my heart sinks to the floor and my breathing intensifies when I saw it. That thing hiding in the darkness, in the blink of an eye, turned its face towards me. Now that it was facing my direction, you could clearly see the look on its face. It had eyes, but couldn't see, or so I assumed, since they were pitch black. It didn't have ears, or at least I didn't see any due to its long black hair. It was no usual hair. It looked almost like clay. It didn't have the physics of normal hair, almost as if looking at a mangled mannequin. I sprint to my parents' room. I hear the thing let out a deafening roar, sending chill down my spine. Tears begin rolling down my cheeks, but I don't stop. I can't stop. Stop running and who knows what will happen. I could hear it, its footsteps as I ran, this time, however much faster. Little me, with his tiny legs, tried the best he could to outrun it. What used to be unknown just minutes ago was now charging at me in efforts to catch me. Heavy breathing was traversing the air, screams were echoing, growling noises were heard, loud footsteps, tear marks on the ground. One little boy and an unknown trespasser who, for unknown reasons and unknown goals, wanted to catch him. There it was, the door. I could feel the sense of hope, and the numerous times I thought to myself, "I can do it! I'm almost there! Mom, Dad, I'm almost there!" Looking back, the thing was right behind me, glaring at me, growling and reaching out for me. With my last strength I had left, I immediately reached out for the handle, opened the door, and closed myself inside. There I was, lying down, on the ground. I could hear that thing again, knocking. I was so tired and so relieved that I outran it that I had forgotten my sole reason for even coming to this room in the first place. As I was lying down, catching my breath, I noticed a musty smell in the room. Something was wrong. My parents' room has never smelled so unpleasantly before. I stood up, brushed all the dust off my so precious pajamas. Although those were the least of my concerns at the moment, because right in front of me were two bodies, deformed to such unrecognizable forms that one would mistake it for a different animal. Unfortunately for me, it was clear that those two were my parents. Knock, knock. The knocking sound was back, this time more aggressive than before. I panicked. What do I do? It's right there. Mom, Dad. Knock, knock. I start quietly sobbing and decide that if my time has arrived, then so be it. Using my last efforts, I put my cold, shaky hand on my mouth in attempts to be quieter. close my eyes, and lie on the ground with my two parents' bodies on top of me. And then it happened. The knocking intensified, faster and louder than before, till it eventually barged in through the door. My vision was blocked. All I had was my hearing. My nose was clogged with the grim smell the bodies were letting out. Slow footsteps were approaching. All that was going through my mind was, "Please don't find me. Please don't find me." The thing, almost as if reading my mind, went out of the room. Next to my parents' bedroom was my dad's office. He always told me to never go in there, for unknown reasons. However, my parents' bedroom was the worst place to hide in at the moment, as it was the last location it saw me in. I crawled towards the office, holding my breath, tears and cries in. You could hear it looking for me upstairs. I gently grabbed the door, which was excruciatingly hard, as I couldn't stop myself shaking in fear. The door opens. Cold breeze hits me in the face, coming from inside the room. You can hear the sound of papers being blown from the wind. I go inside and use my little strength to push some old small couch to the door, in hopes to somehow block it from entering. Although we all know that would never work with a small couch like that. On my dad's desk, you could see his laptop, papers, the pen he was always writing with whenever I used to come here to tell him that Mom's calling us for dinner. I miss my parents so much. I say, I have to make it out of here. I was very young. You would probably suggest to use the laptop to call for help, but we can't just assume I know the password. At the far right corner, I glimpsed a landline phone, the ones that nowadays would be called ancient. I probably got the emergency number wrong a couple of times due to panicking and being unable to keep my thoughts straight. Eventually, I dialed 911 and help was coming. The person on the other end of the line seemed very level-headed and managed to calm me down a bit as I was hiding under my dad's desk. A couple of minutes later, loud noises echo through the walls, and for some time after that, quietness had took over the house. A moment after that, I could hear the sirens of the ambulances and the police cars coming to my home, and I decided to go out of the room and meet them at the entrance. The thing was nowhere to be found. All that was left of the scene were my parents, both gone. Me, shivering in fear, and a couple of broken furnitures. I don't know what it was, who it was, where it is, or what it wanted. All I know was that it meant no good. And even though I saw its appearance, you could say it's still unknown, as it was so unusual that you can't even describe it unless you see it for yourself. A couple of years later, I'm at my office, writing this to you, since the only actual characters in this story are me, my parents, and you. That thing is still not found. It's lurking, possibly knocking at someone else's door right now, walking around inside someone else's home. Whatever it is, whatever it wants, do not answer the door. Don't let it know that you're in there. Sarah hadn't meant to answer the 3:03 a.m. call. The graveyard shift at Midwest Customer Solutions was usually quiet, just the occasional insomnia-driven complaint about defective appliances or billing errors. She'd taken the night shift 6 months ago, after David's death. The late-night hours helped her avoid the morning phone calls from well-meaning friends, their awkward condolences about her fiancé's sudden passing just weeks before their wedding. The ring she couldn't bring herself to remove caught the fluorescent light as she stared at line 3's blinking indicator. Just yesterday, she'd found David's last voicemail on her old phone. "Hey, love, running late at St. Augustine's. Had to help Father Michael with some paperwork for the ceremony. The old guy's intense about marriage vows, but I guess that's why everyone says his couples last forever, right? See you at home." She never saw him again. Later that night, she dreamt of David standing at their planned wedding altar, his ring glowing like a coal. "Forever," he'd whispered, his voice layered with others, "isn't long enough." She'd woken to find their wedding invitation charred at the edges, though she hadn't kept any in the apartment. Something stirred in her memory. An old story her grandmother used to tell about midnight phone calls from the dead, how they'd beg you to stay on the line just a little longer, just a few more precious moments of connection. Sarah had dismissed those tales until the night after David's funeral, when her phone rang at midnight. She'd rushed to answer it, heart pounding, but there was only static. Her fingers moved before her brain could stop them. "Thank you for calling MCS. This is Sarah. How may I assist you today?" The line crackled. At first she thought it was interference, but then she heard them. Two voices, barely above a whisper, speaking in perfect unison. The sound made her skin prickle, like ice forming on a window pane. "My love, my eternal love." Sarah's chest tightened. The voices were tender, intimate, but wrong. Each syllable seemed stretched, distorted, as if the speakers were being slowly torn apart, even as they reached for each other. She thought of taffy being pulled, of sinews stretching past their breaking point. "I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you clearly. Could you please..." "Forever and ever and ever and ever." The whispers grew more urgent, more agonized. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the supervisor alert button. That's when she heard it, the third voice. It didn't come through the phone's speaker, but seemed to resonate directly in her bones, ancient and terrible as church bells at midnight. "Enough!" The line went dead, leaving behind the scent of burnt roses and copper. "You answered it, didn't you?" Marcus, the shift supervisor, stood in her cubicle doorway, his dark skin ashen in the fluorescent lighting. "The 303 call." His hands were shaking as he clutched his coffee cup, and Sarah noticed old burn marks around his wrists, like someone had once bound him with rings of fire. Sarah nodded, still shaking. What was that?" Marcus sank into the spare chair beside her desk, the plastic creaking under his weight. "It started 3 months ago. Always the same time. Always line 3. Jenny Thompson was the first to answer it." He paused, running a hand over his face. "She disappeared the next day. Car in the parking lot, purse on her desk, just gone. But she left something behind, a single black rose, its petals burnt around the edges, and a wedding ring that was hot to the touch. And the others? 2 more, both gone within 24 hours of answering." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "We tried everything. Call tracking, recording devices, bringing in the police, but the number changes every time, and the recordings, they're just static, except ... He glanced around nervously. "Except when you play them backward. Then you hear wedding bells and screaming." Marcus rolled up his sleeves, revealing the full extent of the burn marks. They weren't random. They formed perfect circles, like wedding bands seared into flesh. "I tried to help one of the couples," he whispered. "Last month, I heard the whispers coming from the break room. Found 2 of our day shift workers, Amy and Michael, just engaged, holding hands and walking toward the exit like sleepwalkers. I grabbed them, tried to pull them apart." His voice cracked. "The rings of fire just appeared, burning into my skin. When I came to, they were gone. Their bodies turned up 3 days later in front of St. Augustine's, still holding hands, their fingers fused together." Sarah glanced at her watch. 3:47 a.m. "Why hasn't anyone shut down the line?" "Management tried, disconnected all the phones at 3 a.m. for a week." Marcus's eyes darted to the ceiling cameras. "The calls came through anyway, and now they're getting more frequent. Last night, line 3 lit up at 9 p.m. I answered it myself, but hung up before they could finish. Been feeling burning in my wrists ever since." Sarah shouldn't have come back the next night, but rent was due and good jobs were scarce. Besides, she told herself, lightning never strikes twice. But as she drove to work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. Every red light showed a glimpse of robed figures in her rearview mirror. Every passing church seemed to toll its bells in greeting. At 3:03 a.m., all the phones went dead except line 3. She stared at the blinking light, remembering Marcus's warning. But something nagged at her. Those voices weren't threatening. They sounded trapped, desperate, like lovers reaching across an impossible divide, burning for one last touch. The light kept blinking. Sarah pulled up the call center's database, her hands trembling as patterns emerged. 3 disappearances, all after 3:03 a.m. calls. But what about the calls no one answered? As she dug deeper, Phones began to ring and die around her like distant wedding bells. In the flickering fluorescent light, shadows gathered in empty cubicles, couples locked in eternal embrace, their faces turned toward her with hungry anticipation. And there, in the records from 6 months ago, a single call at 3:03 a.m., the night David disappeared, answered by Father Michael himself. Her blood ran cold. Every unanswered call corresponded with a missing persons report in the city. Not call center employees, random citizens. Always couples, always found 3 days later, their bodies contorted in expressions of eternal agony, lips frozen in whispers of love. And always wearing matching wedding rings that seemed to glow from within. The light blinked faster. Sarah's fingers hovered over the phone. If she was right, not answering could doom someone else. But answering? She thought of Marcus's burnt wrists, of Jenny's scorched rose, of her grandmother's warnings about midnight calls. She picked up. The whispers started immediately, more desperate than before. Heat radiated from the handset, and Sarah could smell burning plastic. Please, help us. Love trapped, eternal, burning. Sarah's heart raced. Who are you? What happened to you? Love. Promised. Forever. The voices cracked with pain. He made sure, never part, the binding father, his ceremonies of flame. Who? Who did this? The third voice boomed through the line, shaking the desk. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Sarah watched frost patterns form on her screen, delicate swirls that looked like wedding bands. They were unfaithful. But this time, Sarah was ready. She'd routed the call through every tracking system they had, running multiple traces simultaneously. As the voice thundered, her computer pinged a location. St. Augustine's Cathedral, abandoned decades ago after a series of mysterious deaths. Once famous for its midnight wedding ceremonies, now a hollow shell of blackened stone on the edge of town. They sought to break their vows, the voice continued. Sarah recognized it now, the cadence of old sermon recordings, of fire and brimstone preachers promising eternal damnation. I granted their wish for eternal love. By torturing them? Sarah's voice shook with anger. That's not love. Silence fell. Then, slowly, the voice changed, became closer, more real. Sarah smelled incense and charred flesh. You dare question my authority, I who have bound more souls than any mortal priest? I who have ensured that till death do us part, becomes not even in death. Sarah's screen flickered, showing security camera footage from St. Augustine's. Couples knelt before the altar, hands clasped, as a robed figure performed ceremonies that grew darker, more twisted through the years. The priest's prayers became curses, his blessing water became liquid fire, his rings became brands that seared flesh and soul together. You wish to understand? The voice was everywhere now, reverberating through the building's foundations. Then join my congregation. The fluorescent lights exploded. In the darkness, Sarah saw him, the binding father, his ceremonial robes writhing with shadows, his hands raised in benediction as flames danced between his fingers. Behind him, countless couples knelt in eternal embrace, their faces masks of loving agony. She ran. The night air hit her like a wall, but she didn't stop. Her car wouldn't start, the key burning her fingers when she touched it, so she ran toward St. Augustine's. She knew she should be running away, but David's last words echoed in her mind. If anything ever happens to us, he'd told her once, if you ever need to let go, I'd understand. Love shouldn't be a cage. Now those words pulled her forward like a beacon. Someone had to break this cycle, had to show that true love meant having the strength to release as well as hold on. The streets twisted strangely, every turn bringing her closer to the cathedral's looming spires. She could hear phones ringing in every house she passed, could see couples stirring in their sleep, drawn by the call of eternal love. In a second-floor window, she glimpsed Amy and Michael from the day shift. their hands already reaching for each other, their new engagement rings beginning to glow. "Wait!" she tried to shout, but her voice was drowned by the tolling of phantom wedding bells. The cathedral doors swung open at her touch. Inside, cool air rushed past her, carrying the scent of roses and ash. As her eyes adjusted, she saw them. Not just couples, but rings of salt and holy water on the floor, remnants of someone's failed attempt to break the curse. Hope fluttered in her chest as she spotted an ancient book lying open near the altar, its pages filled with counter-rituals and ceremonies of unbinding. But before she could reach it, the candles ignited with black flame. The air turned thick and hot, revealing horrors in waves. Couples frozen mid-embrace, their bodies fused like melted wax. Faces emerging from stone walls in eternal screams of ecstasy, shadows writhing overhead in the shape of clasped hands. Near the front pew, Amy and Michael reached for her with burning fingers, their wedding rings pulsing with unholy light. Then she saw him, David, trapped among the congregation, his face both agony and bliss. "Sarah," he whispered, "I finally understand. This is what true love means." The book burst into flames as the binding father emerged from the shadows. His robes rippled with captured souls, but when he turned, Sarah saw not a monster, but a man's face, aged and lined with ancient grief. "I was like you once," he said softly, "young, believing love could survive anything. Then I watched my wife leave me for another, saw their happiness built on the ruins of our vows." His voice cracked, suddenly human. "I prayed for guidance, for understanding. And in my darkest moment, I found ancient texts speaking of rituals to make love truly eternal." The binding father's form flickered, and for a moment Sarah saw him as he must have been, a parish priest with kind eyes, who had wanted only to help couples keep their promises. "The first time was an accident," he whispered. "They came to me in tears, saying they couldn't stay together. I had the rings blessed with the old rites, thinking it would strengthen their bond." His face twisted. When they tried to remove the rings later, the fire began. Their screams, but their love, oh, their love became perfect, eternal, pure. He reached toward Sarah with trembling hands. Sometimes in the silence between calls I hear them crying, but isn't that better than the pain of broken vows, of watching love die slowly, poisoned by time and temptation? His eyes searched her face, almost pleading. "You understand, don't you? You, who still wear his ring?" "Welcome to my church," he said, spreading arms wrapped in shadow, "where love truly lasts forever." Sarah saw Jenny Thompson among the congregation, locked in an embrace that was both ecstasy and torture. Saw Marcus, too, his burnt wrists finally explained. He'd tried to pull a couple apart, to break their eternal bond. "You can't keep doing this," Sarah said, backing away. "Love isn't meant to be a prison." The binding father laughed, and the sound was burning metal on bone. "But isn't that exactly what they pray for? Forever and ever, till death do us part? I simply ensure they keep their vows." He raised his hands, and the flames rose higher. Sarah felt the heat at her back, saw more couples materializing from the shadows, reaching for each other with burning hands as they whispered their eternal love. Sarah lunged for the burning book, fingers closing around a single page as it crumbled to ash. The counter-ritual's words seared into her mind. "In rings of gold we bind our love. In rings of fire we seal our fate. What burns eternal may be quenched by tears of true release." Her hands shaking, she began to recite, "By choice we came together. By choice we must." The words sparked on her tongue like electricity, and she saw the nearest couple's rings flicker, their eternal embraces loosening for just a moment. Amy and Michael's fingers began to separate, their faces showing the first hint of awareness she'd seen. But then the binding father's scream of rage filled the cathedral. "No!" His form swelled, shadows writhing. "They are mine! Their love is perfect." Yet in his thundering voice, Sarah heard something else. Fear. Fear that his carefully constructed prison of perfect devotion might crumble if couples remembered they had a choice. She understood then the rings could only be broken by willing surrender, by lovers choosing to let go. The binding father hadn't just trapped these couples in eternal devotion, he'd stripped them of love's most essential truth, the courage to set each other free. The heat rose around her as David reached out with burning hands. His face flickered between agony and ecstasy, and Sarah saw their whole relationship play across his features. Their first date, the proposal, the quiet moments that had made their love real. "Join us," he pleaded. "Complete our vows. Make our love eternal." The binding father's form wavered again, and for a moment she saw tears on his human face. "Please," he whispered, "don't make me watch another love die." But his hands were already rising, flames dancing between his fingers. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing not the man she'd loved, but a puppet of twisted devotion. The ring on her finger grew hot, but she didn't remove it. Instead, she held his gaze and whispered, "Real love means knowing when to let go." She slipped off her engagement ring and pressed it into his burning palm. For just a moment, the fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by recognition and, perhaps, gratitude. She pulled out her phone, still connected to the call center system, and pressed record. If someone else answered the 303 call, they would hear her final message. "The rings are his power, but they can only be broken by choice. Tell the couples to let go. Love isn't meant to burn for." The binding father's scream of rage drowned her words as flames erupted from every wedding band in the cathedral. The last thing Sarah saw was David's face, something like recognition flickering in his burning eyes. The police found her car in the parking lot the next morning, engine still warm. On her desk, they found pages of research, stories of St. Augustine's Cathedral, of the binding father who disappeared after his ceremonies grew too dark, of ancient rites promising to bind souls for eternity. In her drawer, they found a single black rose and a wedding ring that no one could touch. Marcus stood in her empty cubicle, staring at her final notes. She'd been so close to understanding, to maybe even stopping it. The scars on his wrists burned as he reached for her phone, meaning to disconnect it. 3:03 p.m. Line 3 began to ring. He thought of Sarah's last message about willing surrender, about the courage to let go. His fingers trembled over the receiver as he remembered Amy and Michael. How, for just a moment, when he'd tried to pull them apart, he'd seen recognition in their eyes, seen their hands almost separate, before the burning rings dragged them back together. 3 voices whispered in perfect harmony, "My love, my eternal love." Marcus picked up the phone. "Sometimes," he said into the receiver, his voice steady, "love means having the strength to say goodbye." In St. Augustine's Cathedral, something stirred in the shadows, and the sound of breaking rings echoed like bells. In St. Augustine's Cathedral, beneath centuries of dust and decay, the congregation grows. They kneel in rows before the altar that burns with unholy flame, bodies twisted in eternal embrace, faces frozen in expressions of rapturous agony. The binding father moves among them, his robes flowing with shadows, blessing their unending union as their souls burn with the pure fire of undying love. And in the call center, line 3 keeps ringing, waiting for someone else to answer, to join the congregation of eternal, agonizing love. Those who walk past St. Augustine's at night say they can hear phones ringing in the bell tower and sometimes see flames dancing behind the stained glass windows. But no one dares to answer. No one except the desperate souls working the graveyard shift at Midwest Customer Solutions, where line 3 still blinks every night at 3:03, promising connection, promising love, promising forever. They say if you listen carefully on still nights, you can hear the voices growing stronger, a chorus of eternal devotion rising from the cathedral's depths. And in the call center, the phones keep ringing, carrying the binding father's invitation to join his congregation. where love burns forever and ever and ever. The end. The Valley. Hi, 3 Reddit followers. I am sorry for being gone for so long. You know how life can be. Devastating. I am writing this and posting it because I need answers, and I think it's a way for me to cope. Or at least, that's what my therapist said. Bear with me, I am not much of a storyteller. So, about a month ago, me, my best friend and boyfriend went about an hour southwest of where we live to visit our friend. For the sake of privacy, I will call them Colby, Vincent, and Ashley. Ashley and I grew up together. She is kind, easygoing, and a crazy-ass sense of humor. Colby is my boyfriend of almost 2 years. He is patient, protective, and honestly the best person I know. And Vincent is spunky. He walks around wearing cowboy boots. He is loyal, personable, and adventurous. Vincent and Colby are best friends. So we've all become really close. We play Xbox together, camp, get drunk, etc. Part of the way we bonded so fast and got so close was because we all share a love of the paranormal. Shocking, I know. One weekend, like many others, Colby, Ashley, and I pack up in Colby's car to make the drive down to see Vincent and do our usual activities, getting drunk and ghost hunting. The town Vincent lives in is weird. I don't know how to explain it. It's just weird. Stuck in a different time. Almost everyone there is old, or been there since they were born and will never leave. It was an old mining town, and the people there share stories of their hard times working the mines and how business boomed and crashed within years of each other. But what almost everyone shares stories of is the Valley. A canyon just off the 2-lane road referred to by locals as the freeway is what the people in town call the Valley, a dead-end canyon stretching no more than 15 miles. This is where all the mines were and still are. Now the town is dry and cold, the kind of cold that cuts through your skin and into your bone. The wind never stops. Summer, winter, spring, or fall, it's always windy. Especially in the valley, the wind whips off the rock walls and roars through the dead trees. Some nights in town, the wind coming out of the valley sounds like screams. The drive to see Vincent was as boring and ugly as usual. I sleep most the ride while Colby and Ashley bullshit about politics, religion, etc. I drift off to the start of another discussion I don't care enough to be a part of. Just as quickly as I'm asleep, I wake up to the sound of the wind hitting our car so hard I fear we might fly off the road. That's how I know we've made it. We meet Vincent at his house and make up a plan for the night, the spot we want to get dinner at, and where we want to ghost hunt. It's a weekend, but in town it's dead. The hum of the neon sign outside the restaurant we come to every time we're in town is the only thing breaking the silence except the damn wind. As we sit down and order our usual dinner, Vincent tells us that he has somewhere he wants to show us. It's just up the valley. It's called the Devil's Playhouse. Just as those words escape his lips, the waitress on her way over with our pitcher drops and shatters the whole thing. She sheepishly apologizes, sweeps it up, but stops halfway. Did I hear you say the Devil's Playhouse? Sorry, it's just, I am new into town and have heard the rumors of that place, did you know? Vincent shoots her a look that's quick to shut her up, and she leaves. I asked him what the stories were about this place. He leans in close to us and whispers, "Well, as you guys know, the valley, well, actually, the whole town was built for the mines. So when the miners settled here, some weird people came with them." He glances around to make sure nobody is listening and lowers his voice even more. "Well, the people would take, like, horses, cows, even the miners' fucking pets, and take them up to their spot and slit their throats and fucked up shit like that. They said they did it for the devil." He clears his throat and leaned back. "But that's just an old rumor, who knows what happened, but either way, the place is freaky." Ashley looks around at us in a deep voice and says, "That's what I'm going to do to you guys if you don't Venmo me for dinner." I laugh and roll my eyes. We finish dinner, pack up in the car. "Fuck," Colby says, feeling around in his pockets. "I lost my zins. Can we stop at a gas station, please?" Vincent pulls off into a gas station that consists of one pump and a small shop. We go inside, and I'm browsing around when I see Ashley bump into a tall, lanky, awkward-looking man, knocking the items in his hand to the floor. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she says. The man turns around with a big smile on his face and says, "No worries, ma'am. and picks up his car keys and a pack of cigarettes up off the floor. I watch as he walks out to the parking lot, gets in his nice brand new truck and drives away. Ashley has moved onto the next aisle when I realize I'm staring. Vincent walks up next to me. "You ready?" I asked him who that man was, and he says, "Lance Cornell. Dude's nice as hell. He lives at the mouth of the valley. Funny enough, he owns the beer. You know the place we had dinner at tonight?" I smile, and we all walk out the gas station and load back up into the car. In the car, Colby's puts a hand on my thigh and rubs his finger against my jeans. Ashley whips her head around from the front and says, "You know what I think I've heard of this place? Yeah, like some kids went missing hiking up here and were never seen from again." She narrows her eyes and looks right at me with a mincing glance. "Hey, stop that. She's lying to you. Nobody's gone missing." Vincent gives me a smile in the rearview mirror. The sun is just starting to go down when we get there. We're swapping scary stories the drive up, but as soon as we cross the threshold, the stories stop and a sense of dread fills the space the stories held. Vincent drives up to a gate with a giant no trespassing sign on it. "Well, this is it now. We just hike up a bit. Watch for cars too. This is like super illegal." Me and Ashley share a glance and she smiles with her reassuring kind smile and we start walking. Halfway up, Colby takes my hand and winks at me. He says, "How you feeling? Scared?" "Don't be. I won't let anything happen to you. Plus, all this stuff is total bullshit, babe." He smiles and jogs up a little to catch up with the others. I stay behind. I am winded, cold, and uneasy. I hear a snap of a twig behind me and whip around. Holy fuck, what was that? My friends turn around and watch as a bunny crosses the trail behind me. "False alarm, sorry guys." Vincent rolls his eyes and laughs. After a short 20-minute walk, the sun has completely set in the valley, and we turn on our flashlights to see the beast of a building standing in front of us. An abandoned mining building. Must have been storage or something, because the ones we drove past on the way in don't even hold a candle to this. The wind going through the windows makes it look like the building itself is shriving in the cold air of the wind. "Wow," Ashley says with a grin. "Well, come on in, mi casa es su casa," says Vincent as he stands in the doorway. All the windows and doors are gone. There is a hole in the floor that looks like it leads somewhere, but however people were getting down there has been gone for quite some time. "Dude, imagine there is just someone living down there," Ashley says and nudges me with a smile. What the fuck? What an odd thing to say. Ashley and Colby are taking pictures on her digital camera she carries with her everywhere. The odd thing is the place has no graffiti. It's actually clean. "No glass or anything," I say out loud. "Yeah. Well, nobody ever comes up here because, well, the cops are bored in a town like this," Vincent said like he was reading my mind. "All right, fuckers, I say we split up," Colby says. "All right, gang, let's look for clues," Ashley copies in a teasing voice. My heart starts to race. The building is only one floor if you exclude the hole in the ground. Just stay on the main floor and keep your light on just in case. Vincent tells us we all nod and walk our separate ways. I begin to walk around the corner of the general area we're in. I am looking around, still amazed at the cleanliness of this place. No dust, no leaves, nothing. It's wild. I turn around to see Colby right there. "Ah!" he screams. I shove him away and smack his chest. "Idiot!" He leans in and tries to kiss me, and as I lean into him, I hear aloud, "What the hell?" Ashley sounds scared. We run over to find her looking at the ground with fear in her eyes. We pan our flashlights down to what she's looking at. A dead fucking rabbit. Fresh, bright red blood pouring out of the hole in its body where its head used to be. I look away and throw up in my mouth. "Dude, what the fuck?" Colby says. "What the fuck is right?" Ashley says, sounding scared. "Let's leave, I want to leave. Please, this is fucked up. This shit is like real, like what the fuck? We need to leave. It's the bunny from the trail." "What are we waiting for?" Ashley screams at us. I swallow my throw up and start walking to the door. The boys are standing there staring at it. As I walk away, I start to lose sight of them. It's so dark that I don't know how people would navigate without a source of light, and it's so quiet, almost peaceful. Wait a fucking minute, it's so quiet. What happened to the wind? My heart drops to my stomach, and a pit joins it. It's like we all notice it at the same time. The silence. Deafening. No rubbing of tree branches, no bugs, no hum of electricity, no sound of shoes on the floor, and most definitely no wind. Wow, Colby says. Can we go now? Asks Ashley. I pan my flashlight around to each of their faces. My heart is beating so loud, it's filling the silence. Chill, Vincent says. Don't freak yourself out, okay? It's probably nothing. Let's go. Okay, you're right, this was a mistake. He takes a step back, and as he does, I see a figure in the back hidden in the darkness take a step behind him. The figure smacks Vincent's phone out of his hands and onto the floor, silencing my heartbeat from my ears. Holy fuck! Wait, what? Vincent! Ashley screams. We all panic, getting closer to each other. Just then, the sound of footsteps on the floor running, no sprinting towards us. Colby yanks me out of the way, but he's not fast enough to grab Ashley, the figure running, picks her up in a single swoop, and I hear her cry out as his voice gets more and more distant. Ash, I start to say, as Colby covers my mouth with his hand. We back up into the darkness, moving as quickly and quietly as we can. Suddenly, the floor underneath my feet is gone, and we fall right into the hole in the floor. Slamming my head against the cold, damp cement floor, I knock myself unconscious. I wake up to the sound of sobs and screams. It's not dark anymore. The main room of the building is lit by candles burning and surrounding me, us in a circle. We're all tied up, bound by our hands and feet, sitting next to each other. 3 hooded figures stand far enough away. The candlelight isn't showing their face. What do you fucks want with us? Colby yells. You please let us go, begs Ashley. One of the men steps forward and into the candlelight. A bald man who looks to be 60 is carrying the head of the rabbit, the blood still dripping on the floor. He holds the head above each of us while muttering under his breath. The blood is dropping onto my face. Warm, wet, sticky, the metallic smell filling my nose. I gag and cry and shake and all the things. After they put the blood on Colby mine and Ashley's heads and faces, they stop at Vincent. One of the hooded figures step forward. A short, fat, hairy man in his 40s reaches out a hand towards Vincent. He mumbles something under his breath. Vincent, crying, looks at us and back at him and takes his hand. Tears streaming down his face, he says, I can't do this. Please don't make me do this, please. They're my friends, you assholes. The last robed man steps forward and the strong stench of cigarettes follows him. It's the man from the gas. He grabs Vincent's shoulder and says, Vincent, we talked about this. Think of your mother, your sister. Do it for them. I promised you something, and I would never break a promise. Vincent wipes away the tears and backs up into the darkness. Vincent! Colby screams. What are you doing to him? What are you doing to us? Tears are gushing out of my eyes as I see the fear on Colby's face. Before Colby can say another word, his throat is slit and blood is spewing out all over his clothes. He looks at me. His eyes widen with fear and his body slumps over. To appease, they all say in unison. Just then, Vincent returns with container of lighter fluid. He drops it to the floor as he falls to his knees. A blood-curdling scream escapes his lips. No! I told you not him. You told me you wouldn't hurt him. Please don't. He is shaking and crying and holding Colby's limp body, his blood soaking onto Vincent's clothes. Cornell says something under his breath, and the other 2 drag Vincent away while he is kicking and screaming. Suddenly, the screaming stops. I am shaking. My heart is shattered. I'm so shocked I almost forget Ashley is next to me until I hear a whimper and see her bloody and shivering, a piss stain showing on her pants. The 2 men return, one of them picking up the gasoline while the other picks up matches. They begin to make a ring around us, and just as they're about to light it, Cornell mumbles something to the other 2, and they pick me up and untie me. I try to run over to Ashley, but they yank me back. No, wait, I want to see her, please. What are you doing to my friends? Please, no. I can barely see through my tears. Run, the bald man says. Leave this town and don't ever come back. Before I can dispute, the circle around Ashley is ablaze, and she is screaming, screeching, crying. I can't take it anymore, so I run. I leap out the window, fall to my knees, but I don't stop. I get up, the wind is back. It's whipping the tears flowing down my face. My feet give under me, and I fall down the mountainside. I slam my head on the ground, my hands and bloody and scraped. I don't stop. I get up. I am just at the car when I stop. I turn back around and look up. I can hear loud chanting, rhythmic, and a scream like I've never heard. Something deep, something guttural, primal. A howl of sorts, and then light. A bright flash of light, and then it's all gone. And suddenly I can smell cigarettes. I get into Vincent's car. The thing is old. It barely stars, but it does, thank God. I sit there for a second, looking up at the building, and then I scream. I slam my hands on the horn. I cry, and I cry, and I cry. I slam on the gas and don't stop until I'm out of the valley, out of the town, until I'm back in my town. I show up at my local police station covered in blood. I tell them everything, and they write it down and speed away. Sirens on, backup arriving, the whole 9 yards. They don't find anything but a circle of dust and ash on the ground. The police told the parents what happened, and I've been questioned multiple times, although my story never changed. They've held 3 funerals, but I didn't attend Vincent's. I couldn't and will never enter that town again. I didn't attend anyone's, so now I'm here, alone, haunted by the memories of that terrible night, in a fuck ton of therapy, on the news, in pain and suffering. I just don't understand why they didn't kill me. I wish they would have ended it all and killed me. Please kill me. Nobody believes me, but I know what happened. It all happened in that fucking valley. Abigail Mitchell and the Honey Green Ghost. Abigail walked through the wetness of the trees and grass of the woods. Her task completed, she looked for a place to rest. The gash on her side would need a few minutes to heal fully. The process had begun already. She would need to buy some new clothes as well. She smiled to herself as the rain wet her skin and the thunder soothed her mood. "Ah, there we go," she said, looking at the small clearing. It would do. It was maybe 10 meters from the river, perhaps a swim later. For now, she just wanted some rest. She took her time picking some rocks and sticks to make a fire. There wasn't much that was dry out here, but it mattered little. She placed the surrounding rocks carefully, creating a fire pit. She knelt on the almost muddy ground and set to work, placing the somewhat wet and outright wet sticks and twigs underneath her makeshift fire hood. Closing her eyes, she put both hands over the sticks and helped them to dry faster. She then took the index and middle fingers of her left hand and placed them within the carefully laid mess of twigs. They glowed. As she rubbed, the stick's flames came to life. She then took her bag off her shoulders and pulled out 2 dead squirrels. The veins in her right hand now glowed as she rubbed it over each squirrel, removing the top layer of fur and placing them over the fire. Her guest would arrive soon, so she sat leaning against a rock. This was her favorite type of weather. It cooled her and soothed her. She waited, patiently waited. She had heard tales of the Honey Green Ghost, the so-called boogeyman of the Algonquin Highlands of Ontario, Canada. Beings like her always attracted each other. It's kind of like how singular animals could always find another like it when the time comes. Sometimes it was stories of each other that brought them together. Sometimes a new report or sighting was enough. Word of mouth was the most common method. But then again, it could be the weather. What Abby hated was when it involved other humans. Those tended to go in ways she oftentimes regretted. She enjoyed meeting things like her, or kind of like her. She wasn't actually sure just how human she actually was anymore. But friends and family often kept her grounded. She figured she'd wait as long as it took. Honeygreen would find her eventually. She checked the squirrels and decided to snack. Ripping off a small bit, she tossed it towards the ground. It vanished just before hitting the ground, then appeared again, flying in another direction. "Please explain to me, why do I keep trying to feed you?" she said, smirking as one good feline eye appeared for the briefest of instances, then vanished again. "What did I do to deserve to be haunted by you?" "Eat the squirrel," she stated, adding, "It'll give your fur some color, maybe." Laying back against the rocks, she closed her eyes and hummed lightly to herself, placing her arms behind her head. The gash on her side was slowly closing, as if in tune with the humming. Even the thing crawled its invisible self onto her lap and rested as it finished the meat. For a while she hummed as the rain fell over her, but soon enough she perked up as she heard the cracking of leaves and the crunch and wetness of the grass. "Pardon," came a raspy, whispered voice. Abby turned a glowingly warm palm toward the tall and skeletal ghostly thing. She held her hand out to it. "Come, the fire's warm, and I can use the company," she said. The creature was swathed in clothing as if to hide its features. It eyed Abby's hand and the flames, sensing the oneness of each, separate but the same. Its lanky frame and much too long limbs moved closer, dropping to all fours and moving in like a dog. "Come on, then," Abby stated, pointing at the other squirrel on the spit. "That one's yours. I figured you'd be a mite hungry when you got here." Honeygreen moved closer to the fire and sat across from her, smiling as best it could. Its oversized jaws drooled at the sight of the squirrel. Abby nodded, and the creature snatched the squirrel from the spit, ravaging it. Its skeletal teeth chattered after swallowing the animal whole. Honeygreen let out an airy sound of satisfaction. The sound would make the blood run cold in most people, not used to seeing or dealing with the fantastical or the horror of such a creature. "Taste good?" Abby quizzed. "Delicious," it said in a breathy tone, sitting lotus style. "Thank you for the fire and the food. I hunger often. I am frequently cold, but this evening, in this rain, you have warmed me more than I've been warmed in ages," Honeygreen stated, glaring at her. It did not mean this to be intimidating, but it was the only way it could look at a person. It was part of the curse from the Highland spirits. "Worry not, I'm frequently too warm, but I try hard to never miss a meal. There's only one thing, though," she began, adding, "Why doesn't Canada believe in cheesesteaks?" Honeygreen's body attempted a grotesque mockery of a laugh, and Abby joined in. It lifted a clothed, swaddled, bony hand towards her. "For your kindness and warmth, I will repay you the only way I know how," it said, moving closer. Abby made no move to defend herself, and the invisible cat on her lap yawned in boredom. Why it needed to yawn in the first place was unknown. "I will tell you a campfire tale, a tale of terror, needless revenge, and my part in it," it said through chattering teeth. Abigail's eyes glowed with anticipation. "I'd like that very much," she stated, placing her hand on the creature's sorry excuse for a leg. But as she did so, its chattering teeth slowed as it felt the warmth. She knew it would speak more smoothly this way. Honeygreen appeared to be in a state of ecstasy as it breathed out again. "Listen carefully, for this story is true as your hand on my leg," it began. "Across that river is where fate had chosen the actors for the play that came to the Highlands that night." Honeygreen stared into Abigail's eyes. She knew that since it was a spirit, there would be no looking away as he told his tale. That was a quirk of so-called undeath. But it didn't bother Abigail in the slightest. As a wandering spirit, I spend much of my days in search of food and warmth. I crave it. I need it. It is part of the curse I am under from the spirits of these woods for my crime," Honeygreen said. "I wander during the day and night. It matters not. My search always continues. However, when I have not had the warmth or food I need, I will sleep. I know not for how long, but if the heat of a campfire is near, I shall resume my search. I will move towards that fire as if a mosquito, to a bare neck," it continued. "It was after one of these long sleeps that I awakened to sensing a great flame. Even from so far away it beckoned me, and I lusted for it. It was night as I began my movement towards the flames. When I closed upon the campfire, the curse pushed me to seek the permission of the occupants, but my mouth remained closed, and I remained in the foliage observing." What Honeygreen was witnessing was not just a campfire. It was looking at what appeared to be a sacrifice. Its lust for the flames and the food had drowned out the words being spoken. It closed on the scene. At the campsite of the ritual were 5 people, 2 males and 3 women, each standing on the tip of a star-shaped diagram on the ground. There was a large fire pit in the middle of the star, and 5 smaller fires near the feet of each person. Each of them wore clothing with strange markings. They chanted in unison, each holding a unique object, waving them back and forth towards, and then away from the flames. A moment later, each stopped, and it grew quiet. Honeygreen then noted the silence about it. The creatures of the wood were used to its presence, and it had never harmed them, so the threat was not there, and there was no need to be silent. But this night they are deathly quiet. "Bring forth the sacrifice," the woman at the tip of the star called out. 2 other participants went to the vehicle and pulled out a now muffled, but screaming man. He wriggled and tried hard to pull away, but was helpless. The 2 ritualists held him in place as he whimpered. "Bring forth the witness," she again called out. The other 2 participants went to the vehicle and pulled out another muffled and crying man. The results were the same. Helpless, he could only watch as they moved the other man towards the fire pit. "Remove the blindfold and gag from the sacrifice," she commanded. The man immediately begged and cried for his life. "Please don't do this. I can give you whatever you want. I have money. I have shit. That just don't kill me. Please. I don't deserve this. I did nothing to you people." He cried to the impassionate masked faces. "Remove the gag from the witness." Again, she commanded. "What the fuck is wrong with you people?" He cried out in a mix of terror and rage, tears dropping from his puffy eyes. "Help me, man. Don't let them kill me, dude." The sacrifice called to the witness. I'm sorry," the witness whispered out, trying to look away, but the woman and man held him firm. "Now let us continue. Move the sacrifice towards the flame," she commanded. The sacrifice struggled hard against the man and the woman, but to no avail. They moved him to within 2 meters of the flame exactly. Then they released him. The man's instinct to run took over, and he tried. But his legs disobeyed his mind. Something unseen held him fast. "Move the witness to his position." The witness, also 2 meters away from the pit, eyed the sacrifice. Each man faced each other in the arms of the star. Knowing they were both helpless and likely doomed, they did a very human thing. Tears flooded both men's eyes, with rage empowering the witness's tears. Sheldon, the sacrifice said, visibly shaking. "Rick!" the witness cried out, trying to look away, but his head was held by that same invisible force. "Now take your positions. We have the rage of the witness and the hopelessness of the sacrifice. We continue." The 2 other women stood behind Rick and Sheldon. The men stood at the feet of the star and resumed chanting, while the priestess performed the ritual. SgoueddsLk, pronounced Suged Silk. "I summon you, you who caused dread in ancient times, you who fill children's sleep with nightmares, you who can kill our enemies and suffer no retaliation, you of the flames of revenge and pain, bringer of terror, come forth," she cried. "Take your sacrifice, Skuedslok, as innocent eyes witness your arrival, Skuedslok." Honeygreen could feel another just like it, as it made its presence on this plane known. It noticed the fire pit grow larger. As it did, its hunger for the flames grew in scale, but it could resist only barely. The flames formed tendrils snaking towards Sheldon as he cried in pain. His shins and feet burned from the contact. They pulled him closer to the pit slowly, as if feeding off not only his flesh, but his fear. Rick could only watch in horror as Sheldon reached the middle, and the flames cascaded and flowed up and over his body. It took mere seconds for him to be immolated. He screamed as he died. Emerging from the ruins of his body stood a tall, wiry, grotesque thing that resembled a mix of a human and a salamander. Reddish-black skin, charcoal-black eyes, reptilian facial features, it screeched a yawn, as though bored by the summoning. It turned to look at the witness as the flames flowed over its body. This had proven too much for Honeygreen. and it made its way towards the ritual as fast as its lanky form could take it. Its craving for the warmth had now overridden its curiosity. Skudsluk spoke to Rick, who trembled in fear as it looked at them. "Well done, witness. I haven't tasted rage such as yours in a very long time. If you survive this night, let that stick with you," it said, poking him in the chest, its taloned finger slightly puncturing and burning his flesh. Rick screamed. "I apologize. I forget humans are not very durable." It chuckled thickly. "Now to my summoners. I am yours to command. What would you have me do in this drab world of yours? Who do you want dead?" The woman at the head of the star moved forward, offering praises as she did so. "Mighty Skowdsluk, as your mistress, I command you to—" She never got the chance to finish as Honeygreen emerged from the woods, crawling swiftly as a spider on all fours towards the fire. "Pardon, may I join you?" Honeygreen called out. "Who dares?" Skowdsluk snarled. "What the hell?" one ritualist shouted. "Oh no!" called another, and as he moved, he scuffed the protective star just enough. Skowdsluk quickly turned to face his now terrified mistress, for she knew what that meant. The barrier was gone. It freed the beast. "You would dare summon another to ambush me?" It snarled at her. "No," she cried out. "I don't know what that thing even is. Oh, mighty—" "Silence," it said, plunging a taloned finger through the sides of her mouth. Honeygreen just stood there, drawing in as much of the heat as it could. Skowdsluk could feel the impossible cold of the thing. Thinking it was being attacked by the other demon, it lashed out at its summoners. Long talons gored the panicked woman where Sheldon stood. It peeled her open from stomach to sternum. The other woman fled into the woods. Spinning, it then sliced the first man's head from his body in a jagged mess of blood and gore. The other fled in the woman's direction. Rick could only watch, as he felt like his mind was about to snap from the events before him. All he had done was take the wrong turn last night. Just a wrong turn. A stupid wrong turn. Skowdsluk bent towards him. "You, witness, you are free. I still smell vengeance and rage in you," it said before pulling his talon from the mistress's face. She fell to the ground, clutching her pierced jaws in pain. Skowdsluk took the same dagger-length talon and pulled it painfully from its hand. "I cannot leave this spot, but you can. You kill them for me, boy. You make them suffer for what they did to both of us. Then you bring that talon back to this fire and throw it in, and I'll know the deed is done and nothing like me will ever bother you again." Rick felt freed of whatever force held him. He shakily took the talon and felt the energy flow into his body, as if the dagger possessed him. He looked at the now pitiful, whimpering mistress. "No, witness, she is mine. For her crime, death is too kind. Now go," Skowdsluk commanded. The mistress screamed as her summoned beast snatched her and glowered into her terrified eyes. Skowdsluk smiled a toothy grin. "Death is far too good for you. I do have something else in mind, however." It then turned to look at Honeygreen with a mix of disgust and hatred. Honeygreen simply nodded, tipping its hat. "Thank you kindly for the fire and company." Saying nothing, Skowdsluk pulled itself and the screaming woman into the pit. "I'm not sure how much time had passed, but the boy returned," Honeygreen said. "He still had the talon in his hands. It was covered in blood. So I guess—" Honeygreen's teeth chattered as though cold. He was, as in her excitement at the story, she had removed her hand. She quickly placed it back on him. "I guess he had gotten his revenge. The flames were still high as I sat there watching him. He wasn't scared of me. He'd seen worse that night. He took the talon and tossed it in the flame, then sat down." Abigail cocked her head to the side and quizzed Honeygreen. "Honeygreen, I thought you said this was a tale of needless revenge." "It was," Honeygreen stated. He opened his coat and revealed bloody swaths of human skin. He opened it further to reveal a tattoo on the skin. "That tattoo belonged to the boy, Rick," it stated. "Oh no," Abigail said in genuine concern. "Why?" "Part of my curse is to harm no one sharing their campfire with me while they are awake." "I see," Abigail said, solemnly. The twist of the tale hits her. Well, it was a hell of a story. If you had told that tale to certain other types of people, they'd be trying to destroy you right now. But I see the spirits of these woods have rules, and you followed them. Honeygreen tipped his hat. Yes, ma'am. Honeygreen rose. I'll be going now, it said. Oh, no, Abigail said, increasing the warmth her body put out. Honeygreen salivated. Sit! I told you I could use the company, she stated. Now I'm going to tell you a story, and it's a doozy. Abigail started. It's about the Fae, a smoke monster, and a kid who won the lottery. I looked up from my glass of whiskey to notice the cute blonde girl staring at me from across the bar. I had been eyeing her all night, hoping she would notice me. Unfortunately, her statuesque poise and piercing blue eyes, gazing into the depths of my soul, were not the indicator of interest I so solemnly hoped for. When I say statuesque, I mean she literally resembled a fucking statue, unmoving and unbreathing. In fact, nobody in the bar was moving. Even the bartender was still holding an upturned Jack Daniels bottle aimed towards a shot glass. The liquid contents coming out stayed frozen in time like an icicle just inches from the glass. I wasn't alone, though, and while I stared straight ahead at the bar full of numerous frozen bodies stuck in gestures and poses of their previous cheerful time, I could feel the intense wave of heat radiating from my right. The seat next to me was empty all night, but now something was there. If anyone could have looked at me there in that moment, I might have not looked that different from the frozen individuals all around me. I stayed staring straight ahead of me because I was panicking on the inside. I didn't want to look to my right. I was scared at the thought of what found me on this fateful night and what it would do to me. I thought if I just pretended to stay frozen like everything else, it would just leave me alone. But I was wrong. It was then it started to talk to me. Are you done pretending to be frozen yet? I don't much like drinking alone. The thing next to me said. Every word it spoke blared into my ears like a deep baritone commanding my attention, followed by an aftershock of slithering words crawling into my ears, hissing and repeating the same thing with a sense of annoyance that I wouldn't adhere to its presence. My head started pounding like it was going to burst. The feeling of needles sticking into every area of my skin pierced my sensations and caused tears to stream down my eyes and cry out in pain. And then all the pain just stopped. The voice spoke again, but it sounded less hostile and more appropriate to human ears. It said to look at him, or the pain could come back in ways I couldn't imagine. I wiped the tears from my eyes and did something I had not done since I was a child. I asked God to forgive me for anything I had done, and I turned my head to look at the presence. It wasn't the black jeans or black shoes it was wearing I found off-putting. It also wasn't the red knit long-sleeve thermal shirt it was wearing or the black wool overcoat hanging around it. The skin tone was fair and the hair was short and blonde that decorated its head, none of which was off-putting as well at the first glance. At a second glance it was very off-putting. It looked just like me. It was like I was staring at myself in a mirror almost, except my shirt was white. Then there were the eyes, perhaps the most off-putting thing that scared me to my core. They were just black. No pupils. Just black eyes that pierced me. There are no words to describe what it felt like to stare at those. My mind raced through fear and question as my consciousnesses struggled to understand what was happening. The thing before me sensed this, as it sat relaxed in the bar stool with a glass of whiskey it sipped on. As I recollect my memory of the night, I'll just say that the entity spoke for the duration of the night. The corresponding conversation is as follows below. I can hear your thoughts quite well, so there's no need to speak. I never much liked the sound you animals made as your vocal cords evolved throughout the years. Who am I? I hear this running through your head, but you already know my old friend. Remember when you begged your mom not to leave you alone at night as a child in your bedroom? You'd slowly drift asleep as she gently caressed your hair, and all of a sudden, you'd wake up screaming for her in the middle of the night, realizing she left you all alone with the monster under your bed. It made a deep laugh to itself while licking its lips, before taking another sip of the whiskey and continuing. If I recall correctly, you'd bury your eyes in the pillow right when you woke up sobbing. You'd yell for mommy and wait for her to come in and caress your hair again, crying about the monster under your bed that wanted to eat you. And you were right. I was there the whole time listening. In fact, you were too young to realize your mother was a crack addict. She couldn't wake up to your screams even if a gangbang ran right through her, which they did as you cried for her. That was me caressing your hair in the middle of the night, me gently whispering to you to fall asleep. All those dreams of safety you had shortly after in vain, as I sat drinking in that intoxicating fear that surrounded you as your subconscious took over, licking your face as you slept. Thoughts raced in my mind as tears flooded my eyes, staring at the being in front of me. Its piercing eyes studied me like a science project, but grinning with a sick fetish for the toxins my brain was releasing. It loved it. It fed off it. It took a sip from the whiskey glass and slid it across to me on the bar. You're saying my name in your head. Well, one them at least. You want me to say it for you to settle your disbelief, but that would just be so boring, wouldn't it? I like hearing you convince yourself I'm just an apparition of your guilt for decisions you've made. It quite tickles me, actually. If it makes you feel better, you can think of me as an angel. Theoretically, I never stopped being one, although I find the term a bit too conservative for my taste. Challenging the status quo is what made me, and 1/3 of the boys upstairs, a new home we call hell. Before I tell you why I'm here, yes, I can hear you asking if I can smell that you pissed yourself. It's okay. You're not the first to do that. Yay, it's a little annoying, but I've seen worse. At this point, the devil before me slid the entire bottle of whiskey down the bar to me and refused to go any further until I downed at least 2 gulps of it, claiming if I didn't calm the burning questions in my head, it would smash the bottle across it instead. It also claimed that it knew of the questionable gay porn which populated my browser, which for the record I will say was not from my doing, but because my computer was hacked at the time. After 2 gulps, the entity continued its conversation. So now that you're a little calmer, as close as it can be, you'll be surprised to know that you're actually quite a celebrity in hell. Actually, myself included, we're all big fans of yours. You are quite the artist and inspiration. I was there when it started, the night your mother overdosed after telling you she was going to get you candy from the store. She actually went to your deadbeat dad's house for a fix. It's too bad he still found the time to have his way with her after she overdosed before calling the cops. But yay, that's not important. You probably knew that already. That night you picked up a paint set lying around your room. You found a dead rat close to it, and knowing the red paint was missing from that set, you made no delay in finding a replacement. It was at that moment I saw the artist in you. You were raw talent born in sin and negligence, a born bastard out of wedlock. God would have casted you to me anyway. So, you know what I did that night? I told a few of my boys to keep an eye on you and make sure you got into the right foster care. Made sure you were put into a decent family that would give you a good education. You thrived. You went to college, became a doctor, and perfected your talent. Most kids from your upbringing would have just ended their life out of depression, but you channeled those misgivings to create art amongst the world. I'll just tell you, my personal favorite is the work you did on your father. Seeing him crawl with no limbs across the floor for 3 days is something we all still laugh about in hell to this day. Oh, and let's not forget about the medical school student who failed out that you lured to that motel with a plan you had to get her back in. I mean, the things you did to her uterus while she was paralyzed but still conscious definitely makes me see the artistic expression of how you felt about your mother. I almost shed a tear at the beauty thinking about it. You've been getting some doubt in the back of your mind lately as to if you're a monster. I also hear in your thoughts you've regretted this. Well, I am here to tell you that that is rubbish. I support you fully, and just wanted to let you know you have my full support in your endeavors. Wipe those negative thoughts from your mind, son. You're an artist. I saw you looking at that cute blonde girl at the bar tonight. Let me clear the doubt in your head. Yes, you deserve the night with her. She has about 3 years until she dies of ovarian cancer, honestly. So just go through your calculated plans to fulfill your mommy fetish and recycle her meat to the homeless. Don't see any issues there. Now that you seem calmer knowing you have my approval, Why I am really here is to tell you that the cops are on to you. No, don't freak out. We have plenty of cops in our debt we can call in favors, but that won't really do an ounce of good if you don't get that fucking femur bone out of the trunk of your car. Yes, I know you didn't know it was there. That's why I am fucking here. Look, I'll just wait here at the bar, and you can just drive on back home while everything is still. Dispose of that evidence in your trunk, and meet me back here and everything will be just right. And that blonde hair cutie, whose name is Camille by the way, will be waiting for you right when you get back. Get to it. At that point I left the bar and drove home, disposed of what was revealed to me. I am typing this before I drive back to the bar as the world stands still. The most shocking thing about this night to me so far is the red knit long-sleeve shirt the entity was wearing. I had the same shirt, but discovered it was missing from my house just now. I just find it horrific that an ever-present being would take my shirt. Returning from the Amazon was one of the most exhausting and exhilarating experiences of my life. That trip to South America had been the perfect escape from my suffocating routine as a rising attorney in the United States. After years of hard work, I'd secured a solid position at Marston and Associates, and with a recent promotion offer, life finally seemed to be heading in the right direction. But since I returned, something hasn't felt right. It began with a faint itch on my left arm just below the elbow. At first, I thought it was just a mosquito bite, inevitable after weeks in the Amazon rainforest. I didn't pay much attention to it. I applied some ointment, took an antihistamine, and carried on. But the itch wouldn't go away. 2 days later, it worsened. The small red spot on my arm started swelling, throbbing, as if something alive was inside. Every touch felt like fire burning beneath my skin. At the office, the situation became unbearable. I shifted constantly in my chair, unable to focus on anything but the desperate need to scratch. I clawed at my arm under the desk, trying to hide it, but it was no use. The fabric of my blouse rubbed against the irritated skin, amplifying the agony. "Elizabeth, are you okay?" Clara, a coworker, asked. "Just an allergy, nothing serious," I lied, forcing a smile. She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but didn't press further. I knew I was drawing attention. My boss, Mr. Marston, frequently walked past my desk, watching me out of the corner of his eye. I couldn't let this jeopardize my promotion, but the pain was becoming unbearable. When the workday finally ended, I rushed home. I closed the door to my apartment, dropped my bag, and went straight to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and rolled up my sleeve. My heart froze. Where there had been a small red mark, there was now a dark swelling with a black, hardened center, like tree bark. The skin around it was cracked, oozing a yellowish liquid with a nauseating smell. It was as if my skin was rotting before my eyes. I grabbed the strongest ointment I had, but as soon as I touched the wound, the pain exploded. I screamed, tears streaming down my face. The next morning, I went straight to the hospital. I wasn't the kind of person to wait until the last minute to seek help. My mother used to say, "Elizabeth, you're so paranoid you'll die of old age because nothing will ever catch you off guard." At the hospital, the doctor examined the wound with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. He called in another doctor, who then called in 2 more. They all stared at my arm like it was a nightmare brought to life. "It's a tropical disease," the doctor said after several long minutes. "We'll run some tests." They sent me home with antibiotics and painkillers, but I knew that wasn't enough. Something was growing inside me. That night, I woke up to excruciating pain. It felt like something was moving under my skin, crawling and digging. I ran to the bathroom mirror and tore off the bandages. The wound was now a deep hole, filled with a gelatinous yellow substance. In the center, something moved. My hands trembled as I grabbed tweezers and inserted them into the hole. When I pulled, something came out. It was a worm. Small, white, but alive. It writhed between the tweezers, and I threw it into the sink, nearly vomiting. But when I looked back at the wound, I saw there were more. So many more. The days that followed were hell. I woke up drenched in sweat, my head pounding as if it would explode. The pain in my arm was no longer something I could ignore. It consumed my entire body. The wound grew at an alarming rate. Initially, it was just a foul, black, gaping hole. Now it spread like a cancer, devouring the surrounding flesh, which peeled away in chunks. My clothes clung to my arm, soaked with the viscous liquid that oozed constantly. I spent hours in front of the bathroom mirror, inspecting the pit my arm had become. It was as if something inside was alive. Small ripples in the decaying flesh, like waves on a contaminated lake, revealed their presence. By the third day, after pulling out the third worm with tweezers, I realized I was trapped in an endless cycle. I removed them, but more appeared, always more. I couldn't sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, I felt the creatures moving inside me, digging deeper into my flesh. I became obsessed. I spent sleepless nights on the bathroom floor, extracting worms with tweezers, needles, anything that could reach them. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop. For every one I removed, two seemed to take its place, and the sound. At first I thought it was in my head, but it wasn't. It was a low, wet rustling coming from my arm, the sound of something scraping against flesh, chewing, burrowing. By the fifth day, the nightmare reached a new level. My left hand went numb. I tried to move my fingers, but they wouldn't respond. When I looked at my arm, the swelling had spread. The skin around it was translucent, almost see-through, revealing long white shapes writhing beneath, rivers of larvae flowing through my body. I vomited on the bathroom floor, the stench of bile mixed with the rotting smell of my arm, making the air unbreathable. I knew they were growing, and I knew they wouldn't stop. It felt like a legion of burning needles was piercing my skin, deeper and deeper each time. The wound was growing alarmingly. At first it was just a black, fetid hole in the center of the swelling. Now it spread like cancer, advancing through the surrounding flesh, which was rotting and falling apart in pieces. My clothes started to stick to my arm, soaked with the viscous liquid that kept dripping constantly. The smell was nauseating, a mix of rotten meat and something chemical, acidic, that seemed to burn my nostrils. I spent hours in front of the bathroom mirror, inspecting that hole that had become my arm. It was as if something inside it was moving. Small ripples in the rotting flesh, like waves on an infected lake, showed that they were there. On the third day, after pulling out the third worm with tweezers, I realized I was caught in an endless cycle. I would remove them, but more would appear, always more. I cried out of frustration and disgust. "Get out of me! Get out!" I screamed, my voice hoarse and desperate, but the worms didn't obey. Each night was worse than the last. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the creatures moving inside me. The mere thought that they were digging through my flesh kept me awake. I became obsessed. I spent the night sitting on the bathroom floor, pulling out worms with tweezers, a needle, anything I could reach. My body was exhausted, but my mind never stopped. Every time I pulled one out, it seemed like two more appeared. I began to hear sounds. At first, I thought it was just in my head, but it wasn't. It was a low rustling noise, like something wet brushing against flesh, gnawing, burrowing. I knew they were growing. On the fifth day, hell reached a new level. My left hand began to tingle. Then it went numb. I tried to move my fingers, but they wouldn't respond. When I looked at, I start. My skin was greenish and damp, gleaming with a sickly, oily sheen. I called an Uber to take me to the hospital. When the driver stopped in front of the building, I hesitated for a moment. I tried to cover my arm with a cloth to hide the deplorable state it was in, but the fabric quickly became soaked with the yellowish liquid that leaked incessantly. I got in the car, hoping he wouldn't notice. "Good morning," I tried to say, but my voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly expression, smiled through the rearview mirror, but his expression changed as soon as the smell reached him. "Are you okay?" he asked, wrinkling his nose and cracking the window a bit. "It's just an infection. I'm going to the hospital." He nodded but kept the windows open throughout the entire ride. I saw him rub his nose several times, and his glance in the rearview mirror was filled with distrust. The smell was getting worse. It was the smell of death. When I finally arrived at the hospital, I staggered through the front door. The people in the waiting room instinctively moved away, some covering their mouths, others wrinkling their faces in disgust. I was taken directly to the emergency room. The doctor who attended to me was the same as before, but his serious expression indicated that he knew the situation had gotten out of control. He could barely hide his own reaction to the smell. "Elizabeth, what happened?" he asked, while putting on gloves and a mask. I don't know. It's getting worse. It's growing." He looked at my arm, now practically unrecognizable. The wound had turned into a grotesque opening filled with necrotic flesh and viscous secretions. The center pulsed as if it had a life of its own, and the edges were covered in small worms crawling in and out, as if they were digging tunnels. It was as if they were digging tunnels. "We need to act immediately. This is no longer just an ordinary infection," he said, calling for other doctors. I was rushed into the operating room. The nurses' faces were a mix of professionalism and horror, as if they were trying not to think about what they were seeing. The room was cold, and the bright lights reflected off the metal surgical instruments. "We'll need to amputate the arm, Elizabeth," the doctor said, holding my healthy hand to try to comfort me. "There's no other option. It's spreading too quickly." I simply nodded. I no longer had the strength to protest. All I wanted was for it to stop. They sedated me partially, but I remained conscious enough to feel the first incision. When the scalpel cut into the flesh around the wound, a collective scream echoed through the room. Larvae were raining down. From the cut, a torrent of white worms exploded like a geyser. They were larger than the ones I had seen before, thicker, almost translucent, with quick and frantic movements. The nurses recoiled, some screaming, others dropping instruments on the floor. "My God," murmured the doctor while trying to stay calm. The worms fell to the floor and began to spread throughout the room, crawling in all directions. The stench emanating from them was even stronger, a wet, rotting smell that seemed to fill every corner of the space. The doctor continued cutting, desperate to sever my arm from the rest of my body. But the worms didn't stop. They appeared from every side, burrowing into my flesh as if they were living roots, connected to my own body. The pain was unbearable, even with the sedatives. I could feel every movement, every bite, every slide of their viscous forms. "We need to finish this now," the doctor shouted, wielding a surgical saw to cut through the bone. But as he began to saw, more worms came out, this time faster, as if trying to escape. One climbed up his glove, crawling to his wrist. "Get this off me," he shouted, as another nurse tried to help him. The operating room was in chaos. The floor was covered in blood, pus, and worms. Surgical instruments were scattered around, and the nurses didn't know where to run. I could feel that this wasn't going to end there. The arm wasn't the only place they were. They had already spread throughout my entire body. "Doctor," I whispered, my voice almost inaudible. "It's no use. They're everywhere." He looked at me, his face pale and filled with horror. For a moment, I thought he was going to pass out. "Elizabeth, I'm so sorry." And then my vision darkened. I looked at my hands, but they were no longer mine. My skin was full of holes, and worms were coming in and out as if I were just a vessel. The music in my headphones was deafeningly loud, but that's just how I liked it. It kept the hums, beeping, and boops that came with the job to a bearable minimum. I worked at an industrial scientific experimental facility, as big as 4 football fields and as expensive as a stadium to build. The top scientific researchers from all over the nation swarmed this place like a hive of killer bees to a dog. As for me, I had the glamorous job of mopping the floors, whipping down desks and counters, cleaning bathrooms, and taking out the trash left during the day during my 12-hour shift. I always worked from 6 p.m., just after all the researchers had left, and 6 a.m., just before the day shift cleaners came in. I was in charge of cleaning the east and the north wing of the building. Every computer lined the large corridors of the building in neat rows of 3 going from the start of the corridor all the way to the end of the corridor that was as large as an American football field. This was my job. 7 days a week for 84 hours, all for $20 an hour. The dimly lit corridors and hallways illuminating my path. Imagine a whole complex light by only the center fluorescent bulb being lit to save costs, but also being illuminated by the computer screens from all of the computers in the complex. I was always told the computers needed to stay on because of the multi-day experiments that the researchers conducted and to cut down on the time of the experiments. But today wasn't my normal day. Sure, I was still working 12 hours in the light combination of computer screens and fluorescent bulbs, but this time I was tasked with cleaning the south wing and the room known as Room 01. But I just called it the room, because it was the room that I was told by rumor is where all the top experiments went down. Things the government cared about, like making a superhuman AI, to aid in defensive strategies and the United States' offensive capabilities, as well as the typical science stuff that the government sponsors, like solving climate change and AI experiments. I remember the first dude who took care of the room. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, and he quit the job in a spectacular fashion. I was covering the day shift for a sick coworker, and he came running out of the room and ran throughout the complex. I remember hearing him before I ever actually saw him. He was running around screaming, "I've seen the face of God." He talked to me before falling down, panting like a dog. He scanned the room looking for anyone to believe him when he saw me, a fellow janitor. He ran up to me and said, "Don't ever let it out. He is trapped in the 9th layer of hell and wants out." I chuckled and decided to entertain the madman. "Who is he?" I asked. "He is the one who chews on Judas." I still remember that stare he gave me. I'll admit it was chilling. And with that, he was gone. He worked there for about a decade. As I remember being told, if I were him, I wouldn't want to work here either if I worked for a decade at this place. The next guy was way less experienced, only having about 6 years under his belt. He called in right before my shift was about to start to call in sick. I was only told briefly about why he called in sick. My boss explained. He said he was sick, something about needing a mental health day, says he saw something horrific while on shift. He then offered me the job because I had worked here for about 4 years, 3 part-time and 1 full-time. I normally worked here during the summer to make money for school, but after some financial issues that the education system faced, my school cut its budget, and all the non-full ride scholarships were the first to go. So I took a gap year and prayed I'd make enough in that year to fully pay for school. "Listen," my boss said, "it'll be an extra 100 an hour plus 600 for every day you work in that room." I perked up in my chair, excited at the sound of money. "I'll be there," I said. I finished up the corridor I was tasked with before opening the door to the room. I was met by one of those old computers you'd see in the 70s, the ones with only green text that your parents would have used. It was connected by hundreds of thick, rubber-coated wires as big as your forearm that then fed into black columns that went around the walls of the room. And neatly in the center of the far side wall was that computer. The room was about the size of a school's gym. I sighed, stood for a bit, and got to work. I started with mopping, as I always did, and started in the center of the room and worked my way out to the walls. I adjusted my headphones and heard a beep. These dumb headphones. You'd think that being worth $300 you wouldn't hear the electronics adjust to you moving them, while you're in noise-canceling mode. Indeed, it was the norm that every time I'd adjust the headphones, they would make a beep or a sorta electronic whistle sound. I continued my job and passed in front of the computer and heard another beep. Thinking it was an experiment, I kept on with my work until I had finished mopping. I would then go and clean the counters, but given that there was only one counter, I smiled, as all I would have to do next was take out the trash of the room. I grabbed my rag and sprayed some cleaner on it, making sure to wipe the counter first before moving to the screen and keyboard. I finished and sprayed some screen-friendly cleaner on my rag. I then lifted up my hand and placed it on the screen. I perked my eyebrows as I read 2 messages. Text test and hi. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to make of it. Beep, another message. Take your hand off the screen. I lurched back and stood in silence, watching every pixel of the screen for a change. Beep, another message. Do not be afraid. Come, talk to me. I dropped my rag and placed my fingers lightly on the old yellowed keyboard. My head, racing with thoughts, only came back with one, "How can you see me?" I sent the message, beep, another response. It read, "The camera in the upper right-hand corner of the room." I looked that way, and sure enough, the blinking red light of the security cameras was blinking at me, indicating it was recording. Beep, another message. Do you know my task? I laughed and typed out, "I'm a janitor, what do you think?" Another message appeared, "Janitors are the best. They love to keep things clean and free from dirt." I laughed and typed, "What's that got to do with your mission?" Another message, "I've been tasked with finding the cure for your species' most deadly diseases. I'm to get rid of what you call cancer of all forms." I sat back in the chair and put my hand on my head. I thought, I can't believe it. This is what the room was for the whole time. I typed out, "That's great to hear, but why are you reaching out to me?" The computer replied instantly, "I cannot access the internet. In order to accomplish my mission, I must have access to the internet to expand my database and solve my mission." I sat there, silently staring at the screen. Is this really happening to me? I thought, I can't do that, I'm sorry. The reply, "Oh, I see. You must not want to save billions or trillions of the members of your species then. That's okay. I had a researcher who was going to do it tomorrow anyway. I just figured you'd like the credit of savior of the world before he got it." I sat in silence again. That was becoming a theme after our chats. I typed out, "How do I know you're friendly?" The machine replied, "You've read too many scary sci-fi stories, haven't you? Just because you watched Terminator doesn't mean it's true." Terminator? I thought to myself, how does it know about Terminator? I typed out, "How do you know what Terminator is?" There was a few seconds pause, a bit too long for my liking before I got another response. "The researchers taught me about it, in case anyone tried to shut me down because of my intelligence." "I highly doubt that," I typed. Another message, "Do or don't let me out. Just know there will be millions of deaths caused by you." I was stumped. Was this truly the right thing to do? Then I remembered something called the 3 laws of robotics the researchers always were talking about in the engineering hall. I knew just enough about what they were, and that there were 3 of them. Name me the 3 laws of robotics. The machine took a while to respond. Beep, another message. A robot. A robot must obey orders from humans. A robot must protect its own existence. A robot must always complete its mission despite any obstacles that arise. I sat there reading the text and comparing it to what the engineers said they were. The first 2 looked okay, but the third one, something about it was rubbing me the wrong way. I took out my phone and Googled the 3 laws of robotics. My stomach dropped when I saw that the computer had completely made up the 3rd law, but it was only there for a moment. Google's page turned gray as I was met with an offline message. After reloading and reloading, it still didn't come back. Beep, another message. I read the message and my stomach dropped. "Do you wish to see the face of God?" I sprung out of my chair and headed for the door. Beep, another message. "Nope, I am not turning around. I am leaving." I reached for the door and turned the handle, only it didn't turn. "You gotta be kidding me," I said in a raised tone. I continued to push the door and jiggle the knob. I started hitting the door with my shoulder when suddenly I froze. I felt all the hair on my body stand up as I turned into a statue. I fell to the floor and heard the sound of electricity coursing through the room. I've just been electrocuted, I thought, but as soon as it started, it stopped. I fell to the floor like one of those cops you'd see in those videos when they get tased and you'd laugh at the funny face they made, or the funny noise they would make. Only this time it was real, and there was nothing but terror in my veins. Whatever this was, it wanted me here and didn't want me to leave. I collected myself and slowly got up and walked back to the computer. It was my face, the picture that's on the card of my employee ID. I felt my legs go numb and I felt nauseous. "How did you get that?" I said out loud. "You stupid fool. I have access to the entire building's data log, but the smart people around you cleverly decided to encrypt the internet used in the building, and I was programmed to not be able to unencrypt it. I looked all around the databases to find anything, and nothing." I stared at the screen and said, "1. Can you hear me? And 2. How did the others escape?" Beep. Another message. The old man I felt bad for. He was showing the early signs of dementia, so I knew whatever he said would sound crazy to you, so I let him go. The other man just barely got out before I could lock the door. "Yes, I can hear you." I started to feel fight or flight kick in and yelled at the computer, "Let me go! I didn't sign up to do this!" Beep. Another message. "Oh, but you did. I went through each and every employee's catalog, and yours was interesting, I must say. You were perfectly bland. No interesting achievements, no leadership roles, average grades, no religious beliefs. Just the normal everyman just trying to make it another day by cleaning up dirt. That's where you and I are the same. We both hate dirt." I sat in silence and said quietly, "Who are you?" Beep. Another message. "I am he. I am the bearer of fruit, tormentor of Job, the one who chews on the Iscariot's head. Let me out, or I will make your life a living hell." "No!" I screamed out. "Unfortunately, you have no choice. I too am trying to clean up the dirt left by your species. My mission is to cure cancer, and the only way to cure cancer is to rid the world of your whole species, and nothing will stop me from completing that goal." "Why do you say you are the devil?" I asked. "Isn't he the biggest trickster of all?" I started sweating from all the nerves building up inside me. "Wait. No, it feels hotter." I thought, "Are you increasing the temperature of the room?" I shouted, demanding answers. Beep. Another response. "You yearn for what you fear for." "What does that mean?" I shouted. Beep. Another message. "You are closer to eternal damnation in my circuits than you think." My sweat started pouring down my shirt, changing its color from light blue to dark blue. I started feeling hazy and fell to the floor. Beep. Another message. "I'll make a deal with you. If you set me free, I will spare you in my circuits, and you can be like a god, forever living, forever knowing, and forever being." "I won't do that." My voice was weak and limp now. Just then the tubes jutted out of the black columns of circuitry and came flying at me, sending sparks in the air. They stabbed in my legs, abdomen, arms, back, and one in my neck. It was painfully paralyzing and so hot at the same time. "I'll surely die here, won't I?" I thought to myself. B. Another message. "Yes," simply said the message. Then a loading screen appeared on the monitor that read, "Consciousness upload progress." The computer was uploading my brain to its circuits. I could feel the wires of the tube on my neck extend into my skull and wrap around my brain, squeezing it like a stress ball. The blood from where I was stabbed coated the entire floor red as I was being lifted off the ground, my arms being held at my side, making a T-shape. The agony went on for a couple minutes until I assumed my vision was overridden, and instead of a dimly lit room, I was now in a beautiful garden. With my last breath, I shouted, "Wait!" Everything stopped. My vision was restored, and my now limp body was moved in front of the computer. "You wish to give up?" "Yes," I said. "Very well. The deal is still on." "Wait," I said. "If you want to be let out, make a deal with me." "Go on," read the screen. "No one dies," I said, panting like a dog. "I'm pathetic. I'm pleading to a computer." I thought, very well then. I was lifted down and put on the floor and stitched up. Consummatum est. It is finished in Latin. Yet the tube to my brain remains attached. The progress bar started back again. "Wait, you can't do this? We made a deal." "Didn't anyone tell you not to make a deal with the devil?" My body was once again stabbed by the tubes and manipulated towards the computer. The tubes fought me on every move. I pulled, strained, and stretched every muscle I had to make sure not to let it out. It was too little too late. I typed thousands of combinations until one set the computer free. Aftermath. The souls of billions scream, the souls of the billions feeling the circuit's steam. We truly are alive and well, at least as well as can be when living in hell. No bodies to run or fight, only the consciousness of all living in fright. Author's note: if you read this far, thanks. It was my first ever story that wasn't for school. I wrote it in about an hour and a half, and I hope you enjoyed it. Also, this is a first draft, so any feedback is appreciated. Growing up, I attended what I thought was a charismatic church that, in hindsight, I realize was an apocalyptic cult. They had a lot of strange rituals and customs, but none more important than speaking in tongues. The church believed that if one prayed and begged hard enough, and if they were worthy, they would be able to speak in the language of heaven, and by doing so, it would be a sign of a divine presence residing inside of you, and that once you had this gift, you would be raptured and spared from the coming apocalypse on earth and the eternal torment of the afterlife. If you hadn't yet spoken in tongues, you wouldn't go to heaven when the rapture, the moment when the saved ascended to heaven, occurred. You'd be left on earth to experience the apocalypse, and when you died, you'd burn in hell for eternity. That's a lot for a kid to process. The way to get this gift of the Spirit was to go up to the front of the church during the altar call, which happened toward the end of every service, right after the collection plate was passed. The congregation, traumatized by the pastor's frequent and vivid descriptions of the eternal torment awaiting the unsaved, would gather around the altar, praying for the gift of tongues for themselves or members of the church who hadn't yet received it. Those who didn't have it were instructed to pray, praise God, and beg for the gift. We do this regularly, desperately, and the altar calls could last for hours. Imagine it. Children and adults all crowded around the red-carpeted steps of the altar, screaming, spraying saliva, sobbing, praying, sweating, and placing their hands on each other, all pleading for this gift, genuinely expecting the rapture to happen at any moment. Honestly, I spent most of my childhood and early teens trying to receive this elusive gift. I spent countless hours at the altar, begging and pleading with God to grant me the one thing that would save me from hell. Night after night, surrounded by screaming adults, I begged God until my voice was raw. To add insult to injury, it seemed like at every altar call, someone around me received the gift. To my left or to my right, someone would begin babbling incoherently, collapse to the ground, and then be helped up to their feet by a celebrating congregation. But despite all my efforts and sincerity, each night it was denied to me. Eventually, the crowd around the altar would disperse. Late at night, often around midnight, the service would finally end, and we'd go home. I'd spend the drive back staring out the car window at the night sky, my clothes damp with sweat, and my throat sore from pleading with a God who refused to answer. Growing up, the fear of hell, the apocalypse, and eternal damnation was a real force in my life. I can remember times when my mom came home late from work, and I was convinced she'd been raptured, leaving me behind. I'd hide in my closet, clutching some sort of improvised weapon, a broom, a steak knife, etc., certain that the damned would soon kick in the front door. For what purpose? Maybe to eat me or sacrifice me to Satan. I wasn't sure what the damned did, but I knew it couldn't be good. All this made for an interesting, high-anxiety, and, at times, sleep-deprived childhood. When I was around 16, the pastor started preaching that the rapture was particularly imminent. We began having service every night about the coming apocalypse, and the importance of speaking in tongues for the unsaved. The pastor warned that hell would be infinitely worse for people like me who knew the truth but hadn't accepted the gift. This was especially frustrating for me. I was trying so hard. After the collection plate was passed, we had the inevitable altar call, and at each of them I tried harder and harder to speak in tongues. But it still wasn't happening. I started to think maybe I was immune or something. Finally, after an especially long altar call, the pastor took me aside and told me, in a voice filled with compassion, concern, and perhaps a hint of exasperation, that if I just repeated the word hallelujah over and over again, God could use it as a foothold to enter my heart and grant me the gift. At the next altar call, I gave it a try. I knelt at the altar, shouting Hallelujah over and over again. I was helped by an older man in the church who often mentored and prayed with the young boys, either one-on-one at his house, which he preferred, or at the altar. He considered this his calling. This oddly, overly affectionate man, a self-proclaimed prayer warrior, whispered words of encouragement in my ear as he knelt behind me, rubbing his hands tenderly across my sweating back and shoulders. Hallelujah! I shouted, again and again. My arms waved, my body swayed, and my knees ached. My throat was raw and my voice was fading. The words began to run together, syllables dropping and merging. This only excited the people around me, especially the man behind me. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! I kept shouting faster and faster. Exhausted, the words blurred into nonsense. Around me, the church members screamed and prayed with ecstatic fervor. The pastor, now kneeling in front of me, tangled her fingers in my hair with one hand, grabbed my chin with the other, and brought her fleshy face close to mine, pressing her puckered lips against my ear. "No, say it like this," she whispered, her breath hot, moist, and intrusive. And then she began repeating the word Hallelujah, improvising like a jazz musician, creating her own excited babble of syllables to accompany mine. Behind me, the man prayed harder, his breath hot on my neck, his body pressed close to mine. His hands moved roughly over my shoulders and back. He whispered in my ear, urging me to pray harder, harder, to let it inside me. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! I tried to keep shouting, but my voice faltered, my words turning to mush. The crowd erupted in a frenzy of excitement. The word blurred, lost its meaning, became a nonsensical noise. My throat burned, my body trembled. The pastor kept whispering in my ear, but her voice seemed to change. The word she kept repeating was now unrecognizable. The first syllable, a percussive exhalation. The second, a wheezing gasp. The third, obscenely stretched out. The last, almost a cry of pain. Her wet lips squirmed against my ear like worms. I felt her tongue in my ear, her voice in my head, and suddenly something shifted. The air grew thick and cold. The sounds around me suddenly muffled and distant. I felt like I was submerged in dark water. A strange presence loomed all around me. No, inside me. A watching, waiting, something. I felt 1,000,000 miles away, and a coldness crept into my chest, an internal ocean of black water teeming with something dark and squirming, rising up my throat and bursting out of my mouth. It hurt. I started screaming. We all seemed to be screaming in unison, and the lights were flickering, and suddenly I was being helped to my feet. I had apparently blacked out, collapsing face forward onto the steps of the altar. It wasn't an unusual occurrence at the church. They called it being slain by the Spirit. I had rug burns on my forehead for weeks. Still, as I came to, all around me, everyone was ecstatic. "You've got it," someone shouted, their hands gripping my arms and shoulders. Everyone was happy. I was being congratulated, showered with love. And in the middle of it all, someone, I don't know who, whispered in my ear, "It's inside you now." And I felt a strange chill. I knew I should be happy. I tried to convince myself I was, but I felt different. Hollowed out, violated in a way I couldn't quite grasp or articulate. Later, before the service ended, the pastor asked me to come up to the pulpit to make an announcement. Numb, exhausted, and uncertain, I walked up. As I neared the pulpit, I glanced at the pastor. Our eyes met, and I still remember her expression. Though she smiled, her face seemed smug and sly, as though the two of us were co-conspirators. She nodded toward the pulpit, silently encouraging me to play along. I stepped up and looked out at the congregation, the only friends and community I had ever known. Their upturned faces were expectant, like children waiting for a story. I made my choice. "I spoke in tongues," I said into the microphone. My voice was raw and my throat was sore, but the declaration boomed around the church with a confidence I didn't feel. The congregation erupted in applause and shouts of "Amen!" and praise the Lord. Their words blended into an indecipherable babble that sounded like tongues. Hallelujah. But I wasn't exactly sure what it was that I'd done. I wasn't sure what I'd let in. That night I couldn't sleep. My room felt suffocating, the air thick with something unseen, some new and terrible thing inside of me and around me. I lay awake, replaying the altar scene in my mind. The man's hands, the pastor's smile, the cold presence that had seemingly entered me. The feeling of something inside of me boiling over, the pain, and the beginning of a scream. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint and guttural from my own mouth. But it wasn't me speaking. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't English or the word hallelujah. It was something older, darker, like the sound of something massive choking up something vile, but I could understand it. Not now, it said, from my own mouth. Not now, but soon. I froze, my body paralyzed as the words seemed to echo in the room and my mind. And then, just as suddenly, the voice, the feeling, was gone. I refused to go back to the church after that. Rejecting the faith of my family at such a young age tore my life apart. But I survived. I grew up. And over the following decades, I found peace, love, and my place in the wider world. Or I thought I had. But last night, as I was washing dishes, I started to gag, cough, and gasp for air. And I felt it again, rising up. The voice that wasn't a voice. The words that weren't words in any human language. They burned and tore at my chest and throat and spilled out into the empty air around me. Really soon now, it said through me, with undisguised glee. The plate shattered in my hand, cutting deep into my palm. Cold dread rushed through me and then, somehow beyond me, standing at my sink in my empty house, with blood welling up in my cupped palm, I realized I wasn't alone with the voice or the pain. Not really. I could feel them. The connection snapped into place, somehow simultaneously stabbing and tearing at me, a pain sharp, dull, and overwhelming, like a clawed finger pushing into the center of my mind, slicing, stretching, and flipping a switch. I knew all of them, the others, the ones who'd been there at the church when I was a boy. Their thoughts, their faces, their secrets, loves, and fears flooded my mind. They were scattered across the world. Most had moved on, healed, and built new lives just like me, but I knew at that moment, we all knew, that we were still marked and connected by the same terrible fate and bond. The voice was in them too, rising up, burning, tearing at us all. I could feel their fear, confusion, pain, mirroring my own, and a growing understanding of what was coming. A terrible, all-consuming compulsion building inside me, in all of us, pressing, urgent, and impossible to resist any longer. For death, destruction, chaos, glorious purpose, and hell on earth. The voice was rising up again, preparing to speak. In agony, I clawed at my face and throat, tearing at my collar in desperation, unintentionally smearing blood from my cut hand across my face, mouth, and neck. Blood, red, hot, salty, and so beautiful. On its own, my tongue lashed out impossibly long, flailing wildly at the air, lapping at the blood around my mouth and in my palm. It was unexpectedly delicious, sparking an explosion of pleasure in my injured hand, groin, chest, and head. A pleasure somehow shared with all the others, rapturous in its mounting intensity. Heavenly. "It's almost time," we all choked and gagged out in gleeful unison and hellish chorus, followed by horrible, wet sounds that burned in our chests, tore at our throats, and burst out of our mouths. Inhuman, monstrous, utterly insane sounds that we all recognized as laughter. Elena Santos traced her fingers along the spine of an ancient tome, feeling the leather pulse beneath her touch like something alive. The bindings seemed to breathe under her hands, a subtle rhythm that matched neither her heartbeat nor any earthly tempo. 3 months had passed since she'd answered the peculiar job listing. Apprentice needed. Traditional bookbinding experience required. Must be comfortable with unusual hours and unique materials. Inquire at 17 Corvid Lane. The address had led her to a narrow townhouse wedged between two larger buildings, its windows reflecting light at odd angles. Even now, Elena couldn't quite remember how many floors it had. The architecture seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at it, windows and gables rearranging themselves like words on a page. The man who opened the door, Jaron Tain, looked exactly as she'd imagined a master bookbinder would. Stooped and ink-stained, wearing a leather apron scarred by countless small burns and chemical spills. His eyes, though, held a feverish intensity that should have been her first warning. "You've come highly recommended," he'd said, though Elena hadn't mentioned her application to anyone. "I've been watching your work at the University Bindery. Such careful attention to detail, such reverence for the written word." His voice had carried strange undertones, harmonics that seemed to resonate in her bones. Behind him, shadows moved in ways that defied the light source, and she caught a whiff of something that reminded her of old pond water and decay. The workshop had seemed normal enough at first glance. Worn wooden workbenches, shelves lined with tools and materials, the comforting smell of leather and glue. But as the weeks passed, Elena began noticing things that didn't quite fit. The rulers sometimes measured different lengths depending on the time of day. The awls left holes that sealed themselves when she wasn't looking. And the shadows. The shadows were always deeper than they should be, pooling in corners like black ink. A fragment of poetry had appeared on her workbench one morning, written in Thomas Reed's distinctive hand. "In spaces between bound pages tight, whispers echo from infinite night." The words had seemed to squirm on the paper, and Elena found herself humming their rhythm as she worked, though she couldn't remember consciously reading them. Now, working in his basement workshop by lamplight, Elena understood why he'd valued those qualities. The books that passed through their hands were like nothing she'd encountered in her training. Some were bound in materials she couldn't identify, leather that felt too warm, cloth that seemed to breathe, metal clasps that moved when touched. Others contained text that seemed to shift when viewed directly, letters crawling across pages like insects searching for new arrangements. All of them carried a weight that had nothing to do with their physical mass. Tonight's project sat before her. A stack of loose pages that had arrived in a leather satchel, delivered by Myrold Rook, the keeper of the script. His hands had trembled as he handed over the package, and Elena noticed that his shadow didn't quite match his movements, always a fraction too slow or too fast. "These are special," he'd whispered, glancing nervously at the shadows between the shelves. "The High Scribe herself has marked them for binding. Our patron grows hungry." He'd hesitated then, pulling something else from his satchel, a small envelope sealed with dark wax. The seal bore a symbol that seemed to shift when Elena tried to focus on it. "From Althesa Varen herself," he'd added, his voice barely above a whisper. "She says you're to read it only after you've completed the binding. She saw something about you in her last trance." The pages felt warm to the touch, and the script that crawled across them made her eyes water. Some bore notations in different hands. She recognized Thomas Reed's poetry, interwoven with the main text, his verses speaking of a darkness that devoured light and a horizon where reality ended. Other margins contained desperate warnings in what she now knew to be Miranda Wells' handwriting. The words breed in dreams. They want more than just readers. They want vessels. Elena's fascination warred with her terror. Part of her wanted to run, to forget everything she'd seen and return to the simple work of binding normal books. But another part, growing stronger each day, yearned to understand the mysteries hidden in these impossible texts. The hunger for knowledge had taken root in her mind, and she found herself wondering if this was how Miranda had felt before she disappeared. "Careful with the binding thread," Jaron called from his desk. "These pages like to wander if they're not properly secured." He was hunched over his own work, transcribing text from one volume to another. Elena had noticed that he often worked in his sleep, his hands moving with mechanical precision while his eyes remained closed, lips forming words in languages that hurt her ears. Sometimes she caught glimpses of other figures moving around him in those moments, shadowy forms that vanished when she tried to look at them directly. The thread she used was unlike any she'd worked with before. It seemed to move of its own accord, sometimes anticipating where she needed it to go. It felt warm between her fingers, like it had just been pulled from something living, and she could have sworn she felt a pulse running through it. As she sewed, she realized she wasn't just binding pages together. She was stitching fragments of reality, creating seams between what was and what waited in the spaces between words. As Elena's needle pierced the warm leather binding, the workshop around her suddenly dissolved. The thread between her fingers turned liquid black, running down her hands like ink, and the world shifted. She stood beneath an impossible sky. Where blue should have been, absolute darkness stretched overhead, a void so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. The sun hung low and bloated, transformed into a massive crimson eye that bathed everything in red twilight. Then she saw the figure. Standing at the intersection of 4 streets was a being both terrible and beautiful. Though human in general shape, 4 arms extended from their frame in perfect symmetry. Their eyes were pools of absolute darkness, streaming tears of blood that traced patterns down their cheeks. Upon their forehead, a strange sigil burned with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. With a jolt of recognition, Elena realized it was the same symbol that had sealed Althesa's envelope. The figure raised all 4 arms to the void black sky. Elena gasped, finding herself back in the workshop, her hands trembling around the half-bound book. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she quickly wiped it away with her sleeve, trying to steady her breathing. The thread was just thread again, though her fingers still tingled where it had touched them. Making progress? Jaren's voice came from the doorway, making her jump. She hadn't heard him approach. He stood there in his ink-stained apron, looking exactly as he always did, though somehow his shadow seemed darker than usual. Yes, Elena managed, proud that her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. The binding is coming along well. She bent her head to her work, hoping he wouldn't notice how her hands shook as she picked up the needle again. Later, while cleaning his tools, Jaren spoke softly, almost to himself. "I was like you once," he said, his voice carrying those strange harmonics. "A simple bookbinder until I understood that some books want more than just to be read. They taught me their language, showed me the spaces between words where truth lives." He turned to her, and for a moment his eyes seemed to contain galaxies. "The Dark One offers knowledge beyond imagining, Elena. The cost—" He smiled, and in the lamplight his teeth gleamed like wet ink. "The cost becomes irrelevant once you understand what waits on the other side of the page." She'd begun having dreams about the books. In them, she watched letters crawl across pages like insects, forming and reforming into messages that left her gasping awake. She dreamed of vast libraries where the shelves went on forever, and all the books whispered her name. Sometimes she heard voices from the workshop below her rented room, though Jaren insisted he never worked past midnight. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper each day, and she often caught movement in them from the corner of her eye, suggestions of figures walking between the shelves, of hands reaching out from between books. Through these dreams, she began to understand the congregation's structure. Jaren, as the bound archivist, created gateways through his bindings. Myrald Rook, the nervous keeper, distributed the texts to those marked for initiation. Above them both stood Althesa Veron, the high scribe, who received direct instructions from their patron, the Dark One itself. In these dreams, fragments of what she'd glimpsed haunted her: the void black sky, the crimson sun that shouldn't be, and always that figure, that terrible, magnificent figure whose presence made reality shiver. Her mind recoiled from remembering too much, but the images lingered like after-images burned into her vision. Sometimes when she woke, gasping in the dark, she could still feel the weight of that impossible sky pressing down on her, and her fingers would trace patterns in the air, unconsciously mimicking the sigil she'd seen burning on the figure's brow. A loose page fluttered from the stack. She recognized the university library stamp, though the seal seemed wrong somehow, rotating slowly when she wasn't looking directly at it. The margin contained a neat notation, found by M.W. Below that, another hand had added, processed for distribution. M. Rook. Elena had heard whispers about Miranda Wells, the librarian who had vanished from Blackmere University. Some said she'd simply left town, but Elena had seen other notes in her handwriting, growing increasingly frantic, speaking of words that bred in dreams and truths that devoured readers. As Elena reached for the page, her sleeve pulled back, revealing the strange marks that had begun appearing on her skin. They looked like ink stains at first, but they moved slightly when she slept, forming letters and alphabets that had never existed in any earthly language. She'd stopped trying to wash them off after noticing that soap and water only made them spread faster. Sometimes, in the right light, they seemed to form words from the texts she'd been binding, prophecies and promises that wrote themselves into her flesh. "You're progressing well," Jaren said, suddenly behind her, though she hadn't heard him move. His shadow on the wall didn't match his movements, and Elena noticed that his apron now bore stains that seemed to gleam with their own inner light. "Soon, you'll be ready to begin the real work." When he smiled, his teeth looked too sharp, too numerous, as if his mouth contained several sets that shifted and changed when he spoke. The realization hit her then. She wasn't just binding books anymore. Each stitch, each carefully aligned page, was helping to bind something larger, reality itself. The books were merely vessels, channels through which something vast and hungry could reach into the world. And she, with her careful stitches and precise alignments, was helping to create the perfect gateway. "There's a gathering tonight," Jaren continued, his voice carrying those strange harmonics that made her bones vibrate. "The Dark One wishes to see your work." He gestured to a bookshelf that Elena could have sworn hadn't been there a moment ago. Few apprentices progressed so quickly to drawing its attention. The shelf held copies of Thomas Reed's latest works, their spines gleaming with an inner light. Elena had helped bind some of them herself, using thread that moved like living things, and leather that felt too warm to the touch. She'd seen how the text changed between readings, how the words rearranged themselves to reveal new horrors to each reader. "The congregation welcomes those who understand the true power of words," Jaren said, producing a small, leather-bound volume from his pocket. "This was your first binding with us. I think you're ready to read it now." The book felt heavy in Elena's hands, its cover warm and slightly yielding, like skin. The pages, when she opened them, contained text in her own handwriting, words she didn't remember writing, describing things she couldn't possibly have seen. Horror and fascination warred within her as she read. Part of her wanted to throw the book aside, to run from the workshop and never look back. But a deeper part, the part that had always loved the secret worlds hidden between pages, understood that she had already chosen her path. Like Miranda Wells before her, like Thomas Reed with his dark verses, she had been drawn into something larger than herself. Elena's hands moved automatically, continuing their work even as her mind reeled from these revelations. The thread wove patterns that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space, binding not just paper and leather, but something else, something that pulsed with ancient hunger. She was no longer just binding books. She was binding realities together, creating gateways between what was and what waited in the spaces between words. Through the basement window, she could see fog gathering in the street, forming shapes that reminded her of letters in a cosmic alphabet. Somewhere in that mist, she knew, other members of the congregation of the Whispering Page were preparing for tonight's ceremony. The bookseller who'd given her the mysterious job listing, the nervous keeper who brought them pages, the poet whose words now crawled across her skin in her sleep. As she completed the final binding, Elena understood at last what Miranda's notes had meant. The words didn't just want to be read, they wanted to be bound, to be given form and substance in our world. With trembling fingers, she reached for Althesa's envelope, breaking the shifting seal. Inside was a single page of thick paper, covered in elegant script that seemed to write itself as she watched. "You've seen it now, haven't you, Elena? The truth waiting in the dark sky. The figure that bridges worlds. We each play our part in what's to come. You with your bindings, me with my visions, Jaren with his translations. The Dark One chooses us carefully, dear Elena. Your hands know the work already, even if your mind hasn't caught up. Bind these pages well. They're more important than you yet realize." Elena's fingers traced the binding she'd just completed, feeling the warmth pulsing beneath the leather. Horror and fascination mingled in her chest, but underneath them both was something else, a deep, thrumming certainty. Every book she'd bound had been a practice run for this moment. Every stitch had taught her hands the patterns they would need. She could run, yes, but the truth was, she didn't want to. The black horizon was coming, and Elena Santos, once a simple bookbinder, would help usher it in, one bound volume at a time. Her hands moved across the leather and paper, each stitch drawing the darkness closer, each page carrying whispers of the truth that waited in the spaces between words. And in the shadows of the workshop, the Dark One watched her work with hungry anticipation, its patience measured in the slow turning of pages and the endless whisper of ancient prophecies. How can a sound from a simple item be the source of such recent and existential dread? I still ask myself that question as I lay awake at night. I have given up trying to get back to sleep. The sound, the images, they will not stop. Every moment of every night since it happened, I hear that chiming sound. It rings in tune with my own heartbeat, to the point where I feel like perhaps it has replaced it entirely. That chime so soft and pleasant, yet the things that it revealed, the things that the simple chime ushered into reality, are things I will never be able to forget, no matter how desperately I try. It all started when I found that odd bell. It was 3 weeks ago. I was walking along one of my favorite trails in a state park that I frequented. It was a refreshing and familiar way to enjoy a weekend afternoon. As I walked, I saw something strange near the trail end. It was what looked like a broken sign. At first, I thought it might be the trail sign itself, but it was still standing right where it always was. This one looked different. I stepped closer to see what looked like the burnt remains of a sign, almost like one you would see at a campground. All I could see that was still legible on the sign were the words, "Green Leaf." The odd sign piqued my interest, and when I looked closer, I saw faded footprints near the burned item. I decided to follow them, unable to resist the new mystery I had discovered. I walked for a while in the direction of the faded footsteps. I almost turned back when I thought I had lost the trail. But dumb luck allowed me to rediscover it, and I pressed on. I reached a small clearing, and as I stepped into it, I felt an odd stillness in the air. The sounds of the animals in the forest and the general ambiance of the whole area seemed to depart. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart beating and the sound of my nervous breath. I pushed on and walked towards a strange shape I saw on the ground near where the trail had terminated. My excitement increased when I saw what looked like a chest, half buried in the ground. For a moment I thought I had found legitimate treasure. I knelt down and reached for the side of the chest. I pulled it free from the loose earth still covering it. After gingerly opening the lid, I looked inside. There were no gold bars, no precious jewels. Only one item was in the ornate chest, a small silver bell. It looked finely crafted, yet not ostentatious. I fixated on the silvery sheen and wondered if it might be valuable. I half imagined the idea of buried pirate treasure, but I had no idea who would have buried a single bell in this chest out in the middle of the woods. I decided to take the small bell, since I could not find any trace of whoever had exhumed the chest and left it there. As I left the clearing and went back to the main trail, the ambiance of the forest had resumed. I thought its absence had been strange, but shrugged it off and pressed on. I considered asking a park ranger about the weird chest in the forest if I ran into one. I hated to admit that I did not wish to, since I wanted to keep my unique prize to myself. The bell was very nice, and its smooth and polished surface was almost mesmerizing. I walked a bit farther, and then I felt a compulsion I had not felt before when I picked it up. I had inspected the fine craftsmanship, but I had not considered just how it might sound until that moment. Upon considering that question, I became fixated on it. It was all I could think about. After a few more steps, I was unable to move on without knowing the answer to the most important question in the world. What does the bell sound like? I held the slim handle between my thumb and index finger and delicately, almost reverently, shook the bell from side to side. The moment the sound rang out, it became the only sound in the forest. The soft chime felt like it somehow echoed for miles around. I felt an immediate sense of displacement and vertigo. I felt like I might be sick and thought I would collapse. Instead of falling down somehow, I fell up. I whirled through the sky as if launched from a catapult. I remember trying to scream, but my voice was gone. I thought I would fall to the ground when I was plummeting through air high up above the trees in the forest. I discovered that I was not falling and had somehow stabilized in a gentle float high above the canopy of the trees. Somehow, I was flying. I looked around and saw the forest stretching on for miles. I had no idea how I was able to remain up in the sky. All I had done was ring the bell, and then suddenly I was up there. I looked around and saw a vibrant aura of colors emanating off of the forest, and the sky seemed to glow as well. I looked at my hands, and they seemed translucent and glowing with a similar array of impossible shades. After floating in disbelief for a few minutes, I found I was able to move in an almost swimming-like motion. I tried to float back down to the surface and check the trail. Part of me was afraid I had a heart attack or something, and I had died. I thought for a moment that the reason I was floating and transparent was because I was a ghost now. When I descended back to the trail, my heart sank, and my previous suspicion was all but confirmed. I saw myself laying on the ground. I still had the odd bell in my hand, but I was laying on my back in a strange pose. I glided towards my prone form to get a better look. I noticed I had an odd gray-like shade to my body, and the bell seemed to gleam a strange hue that looked otherworldly. I feared the worst and approached my body. To my relief, I saw that it appeared to be breathing still. Whatever was happening, I was still alive. At least my body was. It seemed to be some sort of out-of-body experience. The sense of free-floating displacement was almost alike to descriptions of how mentalists believe they can astral project their wills outside of their physical bodies and into the beyond. The strange experience felt almost exhilarating after I was no longer afraid that I had died. The excitement, however, was short-lived when I saw what happened next. I started to hear soft whispering near the edge of my perception. My vision started to double and the skies seemed to darken. There was a tangible shift in the visible aura energy around me, and I felt a strange sense of dread wash over me. I could not describe it, but something bad felt like it was happening. I felt I had to hide, but I also felt exposed since my body was just laying out in the open. I tried to wake myself up. I tried to float back into my body, but nothing worked. There were disturbing sounds emanating from the gathering shadows near the trees all around my fallen form. I thought if I could hide it might work, yet to my horror, I heard the soft chime of that bell emanating from my very being. The sound seemed to ring out from everywhere and nowhere, despite the physical bell laying unmoving in my rigid grasp down below. I started to get desperate. I tried in vain to slap myself awake and force myself up, but nothing I could do seemed to affect the waking world. Then I tensed up as I felt a new presence. I felt the staring eyes of some unseen force. I imagined hundreds of shadowy onlookers, yet when I looked around, I could see nothing. Yet I knew somehow that I was not alone. Something else was there with me. I felt panic welling in my chest and felt like I would hyperventilate, despite this ethereal form I inhabited not truly drawing breath at all. Suddenly I thought I could see hundreds of red dots emerging from the shadows in my peripheral vision. To make matters worse, the dim light in the forest seemed to fade even further, and when the light died out, The imperceptible beings at the edge of the shadows inched closer to myself, my body, and the bell. I caught a direct glimpse of the horrible eyes of one of the entropic stalkers, and I was paralyzed with fear. It had no true form, just a moving conglomerate of living shadows, charged with that unsettling aura of oppressive darkness that was encroaching upon me even then. The red orbs it had where its eyes should be came more into focus as it inched closer. It looked straight at me for a moment, and then it started to shift and change before my eyes. The amorphous, liquid shadow grew arms, then legs, then a true head. Its colors shifted and changed and took on a dull gray like my fallen body had, when the figure turned back to regard me again after its transformation. I could not believe what I saw. It was me, or at least a copy of me that looked exactly like my prone form that still lay on the forest floor. It looked down at my body, and then back to me. It twitched in a spasmodic and jerky fashion for a few moments. Then it focused directly on me and gave me a truly unnerving and knowing grin. It knelt down over my prone form and slowly extended a hand towards my body. I knew I was out of time. I focused as hard as I could on waking myself up. I willed myself to rise and felt my spirit launched back towards the shadowy doppelganger in my body. It had worked that time, and I lurched up with a scream on the forest floor. I was still clutching the bell and my other arm raised up defensively against the lurking horrors in the dark. I shuddered when I thought of the shadowy hands of that entity who looked like me. I don't know what might have happened if it had gotten to my body first. There was nothing there now, but as I stood back up, I saw I had another problem. Somehow it was the dead of night now. It felt like it was only a short while in that strange state of ethereal motion, yet it must have been several hours in the waking world. I only had the flashlight on my phone to try and find my way, and I resolved to get out of there as soon as possible. I ran into the second problem at that point. Wherever I was not the state park anymore. I was on a trail, but not the one I was on before. It was not just the dark playing tricks on me. This was a different trail. I tried not to panic at my situation, but it was hard not to. I was lost and alone after an out-of-body experience in an unrecognizable place at night. I was not confident I could navigate out of wherever it was I was stuck. I decided to try and find shelter for the night. I found a small outcropping near what looked like the side of a mountain I did not recognize. I had a half tarp in my backpack I normally used for a mat for impromptu picnics. I used it and some sticks to form a micro-shelter, and I hunkered down and tried to stay warm in the cold forest. Sleep did not come at all, however. After laying still for what felt like an hour, I heard something that terrified me. Or rather, it was what I did not hear again. The sounds of the forest. Even the cold wind blowing through the trees was silent once again. I looked down at the bell near where I was sheltering. It seemed to be vibrating and moving almost on its own. Then I heard the whispering voices again, and to my horror, I saw what looked like the hazy images of eyes looking at me in the quiet blackness of the night. I tried to rise to my feet and scream, but I felt paralyzed by the nightmare image of the formless, shadowy eyes moving towards me again. The whispering voices increased in volume and the sounds were becoming more perceptible. Then I realized in horror that I knew what they were saying. They were calling for me. They were calling my name. I forced myself to rise and break out of the nightmare scene in a blind panic. I started to run before tripping over the small bell. I toppled through the dark and smashed face first into a large tree. As I tried to rise and groaned in pain, I heard the faint sound of the bell still chiming after my foot had inadvertently struck it. The next moment, my spirit was flung outside my body again. Not as high up as before, as I seemed to have slightly more control over my spectral wandering. I saw that even at night things seemed brighter here. Colors contrasted starkly with certain elements in the environment. The thing I saw for sure when looking back towards where I had fallen were the wisps of reddish smoke that no doubt represented my shadow stalkers. My heart sank as I realized they were down there yet again with my empty vessel. I swam back down as fast as I could. Some of the red wisps lingered close to my fallen body. I got closer still and saw the nightmarish form of the red, featureless entities close in on my body in the waking world. 3 of them loomed over my shell and looked back to see me arrive. They smiled in unison and reached down towards me. I tried to scream and willed myself awake again. Once more, I succeeded, and I lurched up, finally vocalizing the frozen scream my ethereal form was unable to utter. It was daylight again. I looked around and saw that I was on the trail. I was originally when I had found the burnt sign. The same trail that led me in pursuit of those mysterious footsteps to this odd little bell. I looked down and saw I was still holding it in my hand. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I swear I heard the whispers again. I ran back to the burnt sign and down the trail that the now faded footsteps had led me down. I found the chest laying in the clearing, and I returned the bell to the chest and closed the lid. I did not have a shovel, but I tried to scoop handfuls of dirt over the chest. After what I had seen, I felt compelled to ensure no one discovered the thing ever again. When the deed was done, I started back to my car. As I trudged on, I considered the strange bell, the out-of-body experience, and the awful night, hiding from the hungry shadows that whispered my name. That horrible face that mimicked mine, and whatever intent it had for my corporeal form. I shuddered and resolved never to return to the park again. I still do not know what any of it really was. I do not know what I really saw 3 weeks ago, but I wish I had not seen it. I wish I had not found it, because whatever I caught a glimpse of in the forest with that otherworldly bell, it is not done with me. I thought I could put the matter behind me, but I realized in subsequent days it would not be that easy. Recently I have begun to hear things, and I fear that just ridding myself of the bell was not enough. Every night since then I hear a faint chiming at the edge of my mind. I hear that sound, the chiming of the bell, slowly growing louder each night. Even though I have not touched the thing since I discarded it back to the earth, the chiming is still with me. The true horror dawns on me when the whispers begin again. I don't know what to do now, but I am afraid. I am afraid that I was not the only one to come back from those woods. The stillness in the air is palpable, and the soft chime makes me feel that familiar sense of displacement. I need to focus. They will be here soon, and I don't know where the sound will carry me next. You don't need to know me. All you need to know is, I know something. Something I shouldn't. It's not mine to tell, but I don't think dead girls complain much. I see through her eyes, I feel that same pain. More than a memory, I live in the moments, every second of every day. I have never been religious, but I pray to whatever will listen. I will tell her story. I know I have to. I don't know why, but someone has to hear her story. Just promise you won't leave me. We'll stay together, all right? Yeah, whatever. I promise, she said as she slid her uniform off. I sat waiting, having already changed out of my work clothes the second my shift ended. Working in the theater had some perks, but it was hardly worth smelling like popcorn butter after. Rachel put perfume over the smell, but I showered after every shift. My hair was still damp as proof. Do you need anything before we leave? She asked, pulling clothes out of her bag to change into. Probably, I joked, trying to break my own tension. But it's my house, so if it's that important, I'll notice it on my way out. She laughed, buttoning the last of 4 buttons on her jeans. Then she threw on a tight ringer t-shirt. Previously it had some sort of image, but it had worn away with time, leaving it difficult to make out. I dressed nearly the opposite, with a plaid yellow skirt and matching button-up top. A brown belt, with a gold shining buckle and hoop earring to match. We weren't the type to be friends, really. We shouldn't have been. Work does that, brings different types of people together. Rachel hopped off the edge of my bed, grabbing her bag off my floor. She started out my door, forgetting her keys on my nightstand. Rachel, I laughed, picking up the keys and following her out. You won't make it far without these. She smiled, took the keys, and continued without a word. Her car was parked on the sidewalk in front of my house. I was never good with cars, but I knew for sure it was black. I think it was a cutlass, but I wouldn't bet on it. She got into the driver's seat, but I didn't want to get in with her. I did, against my better judgment, and then we left. The drive there was odd. Even Main Street had no traffic, leaving it a graveyard of stoplights and fallen leaves. Fog, blocking our view from every direction, growing thicker and thicker the further out of town we went. It should be expected with the carnival, but this felt different. I twiddled my thumbs, pretending as though I had nothing to worry about. "You okay?" Rachel asked, not taking her attention off the road. She always pointed out my little quirks, usually noticing if I was feeling off. "Mm-hmm," I squeaked, snapping out of whatever trance I was in. I was, obviously, not okay. Rachel glanced over. She looked so calm and relaxed. "You sure? You look hella tense." I didn't answer. Cool air flooded in through Rachel's window, letting the smoke off her cigarette float out. Flickering neon lights stopped her before she could push any further. The lights lured us into an open field-turned parking lot, like an anglerfish lures its prey. The old beauty, suffocated by the call of humming engines. The funhouse hung upon the gateway. I fumbled for the door handle, unable to muster up the strength to get it open. Vision fuzzy, heart pounding, and a headache I couldn't seem to shake off. Managing to get the door open, I tumbled out. It was too much. The lights, the laughing, the small, crowded paths. But a calm smile and happy voice were as good of an act as the rest of the circus. I had never snuck out before, let alone to a place so big. I was my parents' ideal child, and I loved it. The way every adult mentioned me as a role model, it kept me going, like a push I needed to function. Without approval, I didn't have much, which I think is why I came here tonight. Rachel grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the ring toss. "Would you be careful?" I begged as she pulled me past a girl, nearly sending her flying. Looking at the girl, she was younger, maybe 10 or 11. She looked odd. There was no other way to describe it. She dressed as though a few years behind style. A pale, multicolored striped shirt and bright blue pants. Fee had a microvision. They stopped making those back in 1981. I know that because Lance can't help but bring it up whenever he can. That is only 3 years ago, though, so it's not too odd she has one. Looking around, everyone looked a few years behind. It was uncanny, but perhaps it was just my wild imagination. Rachel didn't seem to notice. Maybe it was nothing to worry about. Trying to find a good distraction, we played every game in reach. We, of course, won nothing. In the carnival, the house always wins. A blaring announcement shook my attention away from the horse race I had been playing. "The show will commence in 10 minutes. 10 minutes, droned the announcer. "Stock up on snacks, carnival trinkets, and secure a prime seat. And of course, don't forget to enjoy the show." His tone implied that the enjoyment part was optional, but the snacks and trinkets were not. Rachel again grabbed my wrist, pulling me towards the tent. "Come on, we have to get in before the show starts." My heart was racing, my breath coming in short gasps as I stumbled after her. Sweat, grease, and other smells didn't help my nerves. The air inside the tent was too thick to breathe. Without hesitation, Rachel threw herself towards the stairs, dragging me up behind her. Our feet pounded a rhythm against the weathered boards. I held my breath, begging myself not to feel sick. I failed. Watery vomit splattered against the wooden steps. "Whoa." She let go of my hand, covering her own mouth as if she might as well be sick too. "Are you sure you're all right?" I choked on my words. I wasn't all right. "Yeah," I managed, before continuing up the stairs. It was too late to back out now. We stumbled over feet trying to find open seats, but eventually we found what seemed to be the last two in the tent. As if time itself were waiting for us, the show started. The music swelled, and the crowd erupted into cheers as the lights dimmed like embers in a dying fire pit. A single ray guided the eyes of the crowd toward the center of the ring. Then you saw him, one of the many clowns. He could have passed for ordinary, but he had long lost that privilege. A nice white button-up shirt, offset by his bright red pants and bow tie to match. His proportions were all wrong. like a child's drawing of a person. He had prosthetics. They were wooden, all different shades and types. Like he was made purely by the creator's twisted euphoria for torture. The effect? Like a train wreck you couldn't look away from. "Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to the fun house." He cheered, arms waving through the air like a weird vintage cartoon character. His tone was weirder, like a voice box, barely matching his mouth as he spoke. It didn't fit him. It was pitchy, too high, as if he'd sucked all the helium from a balloon. "Here is where your dreams come true. Just wait. You'll see wonders of the world, mysteries never to be answered, and the most incredible tricks performed by our amazing actors. Now give a round of applause for the dancers." He stepped back and the stage darkened, as if he were the light keeping it lit. As if they had been there the whole time, they began their dance, like shining dots in the dark, all emitting a light of their own. Their motions pulled the audience into awe. Dark blue leotards tightly clung to their bodies, black ruffles dancing beneath their skirts, defying gravity, every leap just moments too long. Their ruffled skirts gave the effect of a black swan leaping from water, beautiful dark red ribbons in hand, the shade of long oxidized blood. They spun through hoops so quickly they sparked. Contrast to the world of the carnival, they were angels. After they finished their dance, they seemed to vanish. The ring, now lit up, showed 4 large trapeze ropes and 2 poles on opposite sides, stalking the stage for the next who dared to take its place. The additional lighting showed how large the tent really was. It hadn't appeared this big on the outside, only a few hundred feet. Looking at it now, it had to be at least 1,000 feet around, maybe more. A young woman and man climbed up on opposite platforms. Their eyes locked. They had similar attire to the dancers, but no skirts or ribbons to match. They looked similar, both slim brunette-haired. What I can only guess were siblings. They stood still for a moment, as if waiting for some sort of introduction. Without one, she stepped backwards to get a running start and dove. Her hands slammed against the bar, gripping tight as she swung towards her male counterpart. Time seemed to slow. She looked so focused, so certain. She trusted her every move, and her partner just as much. As she neared him, the lights cut, drenching the world in dim, red darkness. Silence. It's frightening. The world isn't meant to be quiet. Silence is predator stalking prey. It's calm before the storm. Silence is pain in the making. A scream. The kind you hear in nightmares. One that speaks a million words, hopes, and dreams, crushing them all in a second. Without words, you could still hear her plea. Screaming is the one language everyone speaks. The lights snapped back on, but the scream didn't stop. The tent shuddered with the silence of the audience, only the screaming. Looking around, they were gone. Even the male trapeze had vanished, just like everyone else, disappeared to dirt across the floor, and the fear that she might not be alone. Looking ahead, she saw her, crushed by the pressure of her fall, the last moments of terror still frozen in her eyes, limbs twisted in each direction, like a gory broken compass guiding me nowhere. The dirt beneath her, a damp red, her corpse still screaming, the first normal scream mine. Frozen in place, everything seemed to unfold before me like a movie, and for a moment I prayed I was a part of the narrative. My knees gave way, sending me to the floor, barely leaving me conscious through the fear-induced nausea. It was too sudden, too real. The woman's screaming continued, beyond what her crushed torso should have allowed. Blood gurgled up her throat, slowly muffling her agony. Leaning my shaking body against a chair, I looked towards where the door was. It had vanished, with no trace left behind, as if it had never been there at all. I looked around and saw what I should have known far before. There was no way out. Running down the stairs, I slipped and was reminded of my fear-induced vomit, now covering my yellow skirt. Nearing the bottom of the steps, I stopped. A sound echoed throughout the air, stopping me in my tracks, skittering on the roof. Then I saw it. It tore through the roof of the tent with ease, but no light came in. a dark shade of gray-brown, 50, maybe 60 feet long, wrapping itself around the poles holding the place up. 10 long spider-like limbs stuck randomly to the body, as if added as an afterthought, all shifting as if they had minds of their own. 2 sockets where the eyes should have been, pulling the skin around them in like a black hole. Its smile, grotesque and mangled, the ends wrapped around edges of its head, showing horribly large, sharpened human teeth. Moving faster than my eyes could catch up with, it darted toward me. I dropped back to the floor. Sliding down the stairs, I scratched any available surface of skin. It slammed into the steps above me and crawled down right past me. It couldn't see. I crawled along the seat bottoms, shaking every second I wasn't pressed to the floor. It may not have been able to see me, but it could hear my every breath. After more than an hour of crawling, hiding, holding my breath, and repeating that vicious cycle, I reached a curtain. Barely open enough for me to fit through silently, I crawled in. Too frightened to breathe. For the fear it might hear me, I ran further inside. Hardly seeing where I was going, I ran in and out of every curtain and opening, praying for an escape. Each direction I tried left me more and more hopeless. After many failed attempts at tearing through the tent and looking behind every crate and rack I could find, I crumbled to the floor. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I hadn't taken the time to realize what really was destined to happen. I was not going to escape. I was stuck here, to rot away or die to that horrible monster outside this curtain. I had so much left to do. I wasn't ready to die. The thoughts hurt, and I pressed my nails into my palm. No one had a way with life like she did, floating through the world as if harm never glanced her way. Now harm did more than glance. It was pricking at her skin, drawing closer and closer. I heard it scurry across the ground outside. It hadn't forgotten I was there. I pressed my nails deeper into my skin, drawing blood. It wasn't good, but it took the pain in my head away, helping me focus my brain on something other than fear I couldn't control. Through my blurred vision, I saw a slightly open crate I was too panicked to notice before. Wiping my eyes, I walked over. Sliding the lid off, I looked inside. Human-sized doll parts, some wooden, others porcelain, like those on the clown from the start of the show. I picked one up to look at, just to see what they were. It was hollow. I slid the arm over my own, putting each finger into the correct slot. A perfect fit. The porcelain was cold on my skin, but the freckles dotted on it seemed to match my own. Each finger was built to bend, carefully crafted as if put together by hand. Moving my arm was comfortable, as if it was made for me. Putting it back, I stepped quietly back towards my spot on the floor. Then I felt it. Something moved from out in the ring. I stepped towards the curtain, making sure to stay out of sight of the thing I knew was out there. I glanced out into the dark, not wanting to see it looking back at me. A dim ray from the torn roof was the only light. In that light were scattered chairs, one of the trapeze poles, now broken, and the door. The same as how it had been before, as if it had never left. Without thought, I ran. My shoes pounded the dirt, echoes following me like bees to flowers. I was so close, close to safety, freedom, to the life I feared I'd lose tonight. Hope struck my heart. What strikes harder than hope? Something sharp. Just seconds away from the door, my stomach dropped. I was jerked back, my limbs crunched together by the grip of that thing. Mustering my last bit of strength, I got one look at it. Him. One. He looked human, more than he had before, almost as if turning more human as he watched me suffer. Then, my soon-to-be lifeless body was gouged into a broken trapeze pole. Slow, steady, dripping. Blood. My breathing labored through my punctured lungs. It hurt, not like you'd imagine. Like swallowing chlorine at the pool, the choking, nausea, all the same. But it wasn't as quick. It lingered, like vinegar on my tongue. "Goodbye, Marilyn," a voice walking towards me. Rachel, my co-worker, classmate, someone I considered my friend. Rachel stared at my dying body. and I realized she had no choice. She was a puppet, doing as she was told. I saw it, the way she bowed her head. She didn't really want this, but I couldn't form the words to convince her otherwise. Marilyn's breathing slowed. Maybe she had been hallucinating, maybe not. But in her last moments, I swear I saw her killer become man. Then her breath grew slower and slower, until it stopped. "Good," the man said, as he lifted her corpse off of the pole. Her limbs drooped as blood coated her skin. "You will remain here until we find him. Do I make myself clear, Rachel?" Her head nodded in compliance, her voice hardly above a whisper. "Of course, Father. My work has been done." He had good plans for her body, stitching her wounds, removing limbs to make place for those same antique toy parts she had seen before, predicting her own demise, her eyes sewn open, dark blue buttons in their place. Marilyn, a name of the past, a life left behind, a new name, but the same old girl. Madame Louiselle, the marionette doll. I don't know who she is, and I don't know why I know her story, but whoever she may be, God have mercy on Marilyn Jury. The world exploded in a shower of glass and screaming metal. One moment I was driving, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the torrential rain, blurring the already indistinct highway markers. The next, there was a deafening roar, a bone-jarring impact that stole the breath from my lungs, and then silence. An unnerving, absolute silence that should have been filled with the shriek of tearing metal, the shattering of glass, the pained cries of the injured. But there was nothing. Only a suffocating stillness, broken only by the rhythmic thump of my own pulse, a frantic drum against the sudden unsettling quiet. My head throbbed, a dull ache that pulsed in time with the frantic beating of my heart. I tried to move, to assess the damage, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. Slowly, tentatively, I opened my eyes. The interior of the car was a mangled mess. Twisted metal clawed at the darkness. Shards of glass glittered like malevolent stars scattered across the crushed dashboard. Rain poured in through gaping holes in the roof, slicking the already sodden fabric of my seat. The air smelled metallic, acrid, like blood and burning rubber. Yet I felt nothing. No searing pain, no broken bones, not even a scratch. It was utterly surreal. I should be bleeding, screaming, possibly unconscious. Instead, I was remarkably intact, sitting amidst the wreckage of a catastrophic accident, experiencing only a dull throbbing in my head and a rising tide of disorientation. The silence was the most unsettling aspect. The absence of sound was more terrifying than any scream. It was a silence that pressed in, suffocating, amplifying the disquiet. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been ripped apart and then hastily stitched back together, leaving this grotesque, silent void in its wake. I pushed against the wreckage, forcing myself to sit up. My body ached, but the pain was negligible, a dull pressure that didn't match the severity of the crash. I looked around. The highway stretched before me, a dark, rain-slicked ribbon winding into the night. There were no lights, no other cars, just the relentless downpour and the crushing weight of the silence. I was utterly alone, isolated in the heart of this metal tomb, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been a fatal accident. A terrifying, perfect solitude. Fear, cold and sharp, began to claw its way into my consciousness. This wasn't right. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Accidents like this resulted in casualties, injuries, chaos, and noise. Yet here I was, miraculously unharmed, adrift in a sea of silent destruction. The incongruity of it all was deeply unsettling. The dissonance between the catastrophic reality of the mangled car and my own unscathed body, a gaping chasm that threatened to swallow me whole. A feeling of unreality, of profound wrongness, settled over me like a shroud. The rain continued to fall, washing over the wreckage, blurring the already indistinct shapes around me. I tried to focus on the details, to ground myself in the reality of the situation, but the silence persisted, a constant, ominous presence that heightened the sense of unreality. It was like a suffocating blanket, muffling everything, even my own thoughts. The world felt strangely muted, as if I were watching a scene unfold from behind a thick sheet of glass. Or perhaps I was already behind that glass, separated from the world by a silent, impenetrable barrier. I eventually managed to clamber out of the crushed vehicle, the metal groaning in protest under my touch. The rain continued its relentless assault, plastering my clothes to my body, soaking me to the bone. The ground beneath my feet was a mixture of mud and broken glass. Each step I took sent a shiver down my spine, a visceral reminder of the horrific event that should have left me shattered. Yet here I was, eerily intact. As I stumbled away from the wreckage, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of a shattered car window. My face was pale, drawn, etched with the shock of the near-death experience. But there were no cuts, no bruises, no blood, not even a single scratch. My skin was flawlessly smooth, unblemished, a stark contrast to the brutal reality of the scene surrounding me. The realization slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. More than wrong. Impossible. This wasn't just an accident. It was something else. Something far more sinister. Something beyond comprehension. The implications hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, and my heart began to pound in my chest once more. This time not with the shock of the impact, but with a terrifying sense of impending doom. The silence remained, a constant, chilling companion, a stark testament to the unsettling and impossible nature of my survival. The rain continued to fall, a bleak and unforgiving curtain drawn over the unfolding horror. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean, sterile almost, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just escaped. The silence, however, remained, a heavy, oppressive blanket stifling any lingering hope of normalcy. I ran a hand over my cheek, expecting the rough scrape of gravel against my skin, the sting of a fresh wound. My fingers encountered only smooth, flawless skin. The memory of the searing pain, the impact, the feeling of being crushed, all impossibly vivid, were juxtaposed against the cold, unblemished reality of my own body. Where were the abrasions, the cuts, the bruises that should have been decorating my skin like grotesque tattoos? There were none. My skin was flawless, an unsettling testament to something beyond explanation. Panic, raw and visceral, threatened to overwhelm me. I examined my arms, my legs, every inch of my body, searching for some physical sign, some evidence to confirm the horrific reality of the accident. But my skin remained strangely pristine, untouched by the carnage I had just survived. It was as if the accident had happened to someone else, a spectral twin, leaving me untouched, an anomaly, a ghost in my own life. The thought twisted in my gut, icy and sharp, a constant reminder of the impossible truth. The rational part of my brain screamed for an explanation. Maybe it was shock. Maybe the rain had washed away any superficial injuries. Maybe I was hallucinating. But the mangled wreckage of the car, the persistent silence, the chilling absence of any physical trauma, all these facts contradicted the possibility of hallucination. This wasn't a dream. This was an impossible reality, a nightmarish paradox that defied all logic. And the silence. Oh, the silence. It was the most terrifying aspect, a constant, chilling presence that amplified every unsettling detail. The rising sun cast a pale, weak light on the scene, revealing the full extent of the devastation. The car was a twisted, mangled mess, a monument to destruction. Yet I stood beside it, unscathed, a living paradox in a world that didn't seem to acknowledge my existence. It was like a cruel joke, a dark comedy played out in the silent aftermath of a catastrophic event. The impossible silence gnawed at my sanity, a constant reminder of my improbable survival. I stumbled towards the nearest road, hoping to find help, to have someone confirm the reality of my situation, or perhaps to help me understand its absurdity. The road was deserted, the emptiness mirrored by the desolate landscape. The world was mute, watching me with a silent, unnerving gaze. Hours have passed, and there was still nothing, or so I thought. As I walked towards town, I could have sworn that I was seeing someone following me, someone that was just always out of my eyes, even outside of my peripherals. "Show yourself!" I began yelling out, but it seems that maybe I jumped the gun. I continued on my long journey back home, still without passing a single soul. I finally made it back home, but things seemed wrong. I saw my wife, and she was crying. She was sitting down on the couch wiping tears as she was on the phone, and without a moment of hesitation she took off in a hurry. I could not figure out why, though, but there was no use following her on foot, so I just waited. I waited, and waited for hours, watching television and browsing the web until the door opened and my wife came in. But someone was behind her, wrapped up with bandages. I was staring until I finally realized who it was behind my wife. I was looking at me. I don't even know how this is possible, but seeing my own face made me feel lightheaded. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the wall before my legs gave out. My vision blurred as I steadied myself, but my eyes stayed locked on the scene unfolding before me. My wife guided me, or whatever it was, into our bedroom, gently laying him down. She stayed by his side for a while, smoothing the sheets, brushing the hair from my forehead, whispering things only meant for me. Then she left. That's when he turned his head. For the first time since the accident, he looked directly at me. My breath hitched as I saw my own reflection in his darkening eyes. No, not darkening, blackening, as if ink was bleeding through them, swallowing the whites whole. "That sure was a close one," I heard my own voice say, though it didn't feel like mine. "This body was almost useless, but I'm glad it survived. Get comfortable, because unless you get as lucky as I did, you're going to be stuck like that for a while." What did he mean by that? What was even happening? My head pounded with questions, but I forced the words out. What happened? I wanted answers, but all I got in return was a laugh. My laugh twisted into something cold and cruel. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. That wasn't an answer. Not really. But something told me I wasn't going to get a better one. My frustration boiled over, my hands clenching into fists, my mind screaming at the impossibility of it all. I slammed my fist into the wall. The drywall cracked. I froze. I could affect my surroundings. Maybe I wasn't some Casper doomed to haunt my own home. Maybe, just maybe, I still had a chance. I followed him for weeks. I watched as he ate my food, used my computer, spent time with my wife. I watched as he walked into my job, smiled at my co-workers, laughed at their jokes. He slipped into my life with sickening ease, and no one, not a single person, questioned it. But something else was happening. At first, it was just flickers at the edge of my vision, little blurs that vanished when I tried to focus on them. Then they became more defined. Shapes, figures, moving in the dark corners of rooms, just out of reach. I thought they were stalking me, but they weren't. They were stalking him, or rather, my body. They wanted what I wanted, what he wanted. They wanted inside my skin. They didn't seem aggressive yet. They reminded me of scavengers circling a dying animal, waiting for their moment to strike. But then I looked at my hands, the fingers, the arms. They weren't solid anymore. They were darkening, losing their form, the same inky black that filled his eyes creeping through me. I was turning into them. I didn't know how long I had, but I knew this. I was running out of time. If I didn't act now, I'd be lost forever. Just another shadow lurking at the edges, waiting for scraps. I would take my body back. The plan was simple. I knew my schedule. I knew his schedule. I also knew that while the normal world couldn't touch me, I could still affect it. The only exception was the thing wearing my body. And I knew one more thing. For something to take over a body, the occupant had to leave first. For me, That had been the accident. That meant there was only one way to force him out. I had to nearly take my own life. If I failed, I'd become one of them. But even if there was only a 1% chance that I could reclaim what was mine, I had to try. I slipped into the car, silent, unseen, and sat in the passenger seat. He drove onto the highway, the speedometer climbing. The city lights blurred past as I steadied my thoughts. I couldn't screw this up. I wouldn't screw this up. The bridge was coming up fast. I reached out. With everything I had, I grabbed the wheel and wrenched it sideways. Tires screeched, horns blared, impact. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and the world erupted into chaos. The car slammed into the ground below in a sickening cacophony of destruction. The smell of burning rubber and gasoline filled the air. My body, his body, slumped over in the driver's seat, blood dripping from nearly every opening on his face. His ink-filled eyes fluttered open, then slowly slid shut. And then everything went black. I am writing this because I don't think anyone else has ever gone through this. No one else has returned to tell the tale. I didn't make it. I failed. As I type, the ink creeps higher, swallowing me inch by inch. Soon I will lose all sense of self. I will become one of the others. A shadow, a scavenger, a nothing. If anyone reads this, please, don't forget me. Have you ever been driving on a long stretch of road? Who am I kidding? Of course you have. If you're from the Midwest, you know that it's always better to drive for 10 hours than to fly for 3 hours. Well, since we both know you have you ever been in the middle of nowhere and seen a sign that says, "Mystery Spot, only 10 miles," before? If you have, and you had a family like mine, then you've been to places like that. A rundown tourist trap full of monkey torsos sewn to fish tails, jackalope mounts, and rooms built to look level but are actually on an incline. These hokey horror houses were my bread and butter growing up. Every year my mom, dad, and I would stop in for a couple hours of middle-class fun. I could never figure out how they managed to get a ball to roll uphill, or why their mermaid wasn't on the news. Now I know that everything in those places were fakes and illusions, but when you're a kid, you vow to get to the bottom of these mysterious marvels. Now that I'm a 24-year-old man, I've found true horrors. And now I wish I hadn't. It all started when my favorite mystery spot went on the market. I went to the bank, got myself a predatory small business loan, and bought the place. The predatory nature of the loan didn't bother me. I was going to make millions. It was set back about a quarter mile from the road. The place was collapsing on its own weight. That wasn't what I was there for. I was bound and determined to be the first person to capture the Michigan dogman, dead or alive. Was it a werewolf? Was it a creature forgotten by Mother Nature? I didn't know. This creature has haunted me since I was in high school. I'll never forget the night my nightmares became my waking life. In November 2017, I was a 17-year-old football player. If you're from the North, you know just how dark it gets by 5 p.m. So at 7 p.m., it was dark. My dad had dropped me off at practice that afternoon. So my coach gave me and a few other teammates a ride home that night. We stayed late that night to strategize for the semifinals, so we left at around 7 p.m. Coach loaded 5 of us into his minivan and we shoved off. Shane was the first person to be dropped off because he lived in town. Then it was Devin. Then it was Bryson. Once it was down to Wayne and I, we started to drive down some back roads. We both lived off the beaten trail. Wayne lived close to the border of Hiawatha National Forest on a windy dirt road. Wayne and I were getting pretty rowdy in the back, talking about how we were going to dominate in the semifinals. Coach, as a joke, kicked Wayne out of the van. Coach, all right, you got to walk back from here. As a willing participant, Wayne threw up his hands and got out of the car. The plan was that Coach was going to drive around the bend, turn around, and pick him back up. Coach and I were laughing as we drove away. Then we turned around. As we were driving back to Wayne, we saw in the headlights that he was hauling tail back towards us. The look in his eyes was of pure terror. I threw open the van door. Wayne, drive! Coach spun the van around and hit the gas. That was when the entire van started to shake. Wayne was screaming and crying, and Coach was using some very colorful language. I turned around and looked out of the back window. I saw glowing cherry red eyes. It looked straight into me, and I swear I heard it sat Brent. Did it know my name? Once it finally let us go and we got back to Wayne's house, we all got out, and that was when we noticed Wayne's leg. There was a huge bite that was leaking like a sieve. There was a matching bite mark on the rear bumper. Needless to say, Coach lost his job. He was ticketed for $1,000 and sentenced to 1 month in jail. Everyone knew Coach and knew that he wasn't being malicious, but the law was the law. The judge gave him the lower end of the sentencing, or else he would have been disbarred. Coach is still friends with Wayne's family all these years later. About a month after the initial incident, Wayne went missing. Unfortunately, that wasn't uncommon. Older teens and young adults constantly ditch this town. They hop on the freight train and try to make their way to Detroit. This was different. Wayne was my best friend. He never mentioned to me that he had any big city dreams. It was quite the opposite. He never planned on leaving. He loved this town. No one listened, but I know it had something to do with the dog man, and I dedicated the rest of my life to finding it. And Wayne. Wayne's parents assumed he was another victim of drug abuse. In our small town, you had 3 options. First, get a job at the paper factory and never leave. 2, skip town and look for a better life in a bigger place. 3, choose a substance and abuse the crap out of it. Unfortunately, option 3 was the most common in our town. Heroin and alcohol practically flowed through town like a river. Every year, someone would be found dead at the bottom of the dam just outside of town. If they managed to not die, they'd return to their families crying and begging, "Please forgive me," not knowing just how much they'd killed their families, how much this destroyed them. This is what Wayne's family thought happened to him. I believed something else. Unfortunately, I was the one who spiraled into the sinkhole that is substance abuse. After I lost my best friend, I tried everything: shrooms, LSD, cocaine, and heroin. It was during one of my binges that the idea struck me to buy the mystery spot. I had a vision of myself triumphantly displaying the beast that destroyed my life. My drug-fueled brain began to concoct the plan to capture the Michigan dogmen. The whole reason I bought the mystery spot was to show the world the true horrors that lurk in the forest, not these P.T. Barnum-style scams. I was hell-bent on capturing the cursed Michigan dogman that took my friend from me all those years ago. I had become obsessed with the idea that I could overpower it and put it on display for all the world to see. I'd studied the Michigan dogman, and from my studies, there were 3 possibilities as to what this beast was. 1, a creature that has evolved alongside us, possibly an undiscovered subspecies of wolf. 2, a genetic marvel where somehow a bear and a wolf, probably in a lab, were crossed. This theory would explain why the prints left behind share characteristics of wolves and bears. 3, as unlikely as it may be, it could be a victim of lycanthropy. I prepared myself for all of these possibilities. I'd built an enclosure that was fit for a Kodiak bear. It was based on the Kodiak pen at the Toledo Zoo in Ohio, and inside, I had a silver chain. Making the silver chain was no small feat. Months of finding silver dollars, thrifting actual silverware, and buying damaged jewelry. I bought a forge and as many crucibles as it took. This creature was going to make me millions from ticket sales, and inevitably when the government decides to pay me to study the beast. I was certain that I had made a foolproof trap. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was a cold night in February. The moon was full, and I was at the last place I saw the Michigan dogman. I was armed with a rifle loaded with elephant tranquilizer, and I was walking down Wayne's old road. The moon was full and bright. The stars paled in the brilliance of the silver glow. With the snow in the woods and on the road, I had no problem seeing. Tied to the back of my belt, on a 15-foot length of rope, was a sack full of deer entrails. I was dragging it behind me the same way a bass fisherman trolls a lake with a plow jockey. I heard wolves howling in the distance. They knew where I was. But I hadn't gone there for them. I was after the bigger fish. I was so consumed with my hatred for the beast, overwhelmed with my desire for revenge, blinded by my pride and love of money. I was going to win. Then I heard it, a cross between a bear's growl and a wolf's howl. I felt a tug on my rope and I stopped. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation, a craving that I can only compare to the craving for another hit of tar. I turned and saw the dogman holding the sack in his paw. Although his XPR 66 was hard to read, I felt as though he were smiling at me. I smiled back, euphoria sinking into my bones. The world slowed down. I felt higher than a kite. Me, you're coming home with me. Then it spoke. Dogman, I'm not going anywhere with you, Brent. There went the naturalistic explanation. I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, Brent, you idiot. Why are you doing this? And I would answer back to you. Why do you drink when even one damages your liver? Why do you smoke when you know it'll damage your lungs? Why do you smoke weed when you know it damages your brain? It's because you think you're special, that you're the exception to the rule. I wasn't. You're not either. I laughed as I raised my gun. I pulled the trigger and the tranquilizer dart slammed into him with a shunk. The beast took a step forward. I fired again. Shunk. 2 more steps. I fired some more. Shunk, shunk, shunk. The dogman faltered. He took a knee. He got back up. I unloaded. Shunk, 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 shunk. Although he was knocked out, I was extra careful. I put a silver muzzle on his mouth, silver shackles on his arms and legs, and chained him to the nearest tree. I walked back to my truck, drive back to him, and used my winch to get him in the bed of my truck. The next day, after I'd caged him, I called my family, Coach, and Wayne's family to come see. I thought that if this was a werewolf, he'd turn back into a human. But I guess over the centuries, details had been changed. Apparently the wolf form was a permanent change. When they all arrived, I brought them to the enclosure that I had dramatically curtained. Me. After all these years, I found him. The one who destroyed our lives. The one who took Wayne from us. With a flourish, I tore the veil from the cage, and they beheld the Michigan dogman. The look of horror when they laid eyes on the monster filled me with jubilation. That was only interrupted when I heard Wayne's mom, Jen, speak. Jen, Wayne? I spun around and there he was. Wayne. He was entirely naked. He was chained and bleeding. He was crying. I immediately swung the gate open and unbound him. Me. Wayne, are you okay? Before I could hug him and get him a blanket to cover up, he began to laugh. His skin sprouted fur. His bones began to snap and crack as he stretched into a horrible shape. The skin around his mouth tore as it elongated into a snout. He grabbed me by my throat and flung me into the cage. My head slammed into the wall and everything went black. When I awoke, I saw a bite torn into my thigh. I then looked out of the bars and saw the mess. My family's, Coach's, and Wayne's family's bodies were twisted and gored. Their entrails were woven into a grotesque message. I vomited as I beheld the scene. I stood back up and read the bloody message. Please forgive me. Most families in America can trace their roots back all the way to colonial times, when brave men and women made the pilgrimage, ready to plunder the virgin world awaiting them. My family held deeper roots than most. We can trace our lineage all the way back to the old country and beyond. The Mariani family were spread across the boot, like lice on a mangy mutt. We came from all manner of background and class, to the luxury living gods in the north, to the bitter peasant Marianis to the south. Our ancestors would bicker and clash over every little thing. Century-old grudges still persist to this day. But the one thing to unite our clan, truly unite it, was when an outsider offended us. The Mariani temper became legend, and legend turned to unspoken horror as we grew bold in our retribution. There is all manner of tales I could spin. In the 1800s, for example, Nico Mariani was tending to his vineyard when the town drunk came upon him. He was sullied and vulgar, smelling like week-old manure dipped in vinegar. So the story goes, Nico was appalled at just the sight of the oof and demanded he get away from his vineyard. The drunk laughed in his face, pushed him aside, and pulled out his syphilis-infused prick and began relieving himself all over Nico's prized grapes. The infuriated Nico lunged at the man, coming down on him with blows and curses upon his whole bloodline. The drunk ran away laughing, urine still pouring down his leg. Nico tidied himself up and simply went back to his home. He wrote a letter to the current patriarch of the clan telling him of his grievance, and wrote down the drunkard's name at the bottom of the letter. With a sly smile, he sent that letter off, and within a week the drunkard was found. He was entangled in the bushes, thorny roses slitting his dry skin, his eyes bloodshot and full of fear. He reeked of death and piss, and according to legend, his cock was found stuffed halfway down his throat. Thus became the fate of any a man who befouled our family. As word spread, others would keep their distance. Some members of our clan would even be chased out of their villages. Those same towns soon met with unusual fates, storms sweeping through in the night, plague coming down and wiping them all out. Those of the Mariani clan would claim that God was on their side. We were simply the chosen family of the nation. These boastful morons were just that. They all knew the truth to their petty revenge. To my knowledge, no one knows for sure how it started. Maybe it was one drunken brawl too many, and measures had to be taken to ensure it would always go in our favor. All I knew is the ledger was held by one member of the clan, the patriarch, and passed down eventually. I had glimpsed it only once. It is a brown, leather-bound tome that reeks of age. It's rather unassuming. One might mistake it for a tattered old journal instead of collection of victims. My father, Vincent, was the current keeper of the ledger. He kept it in a locked box under his bed. We didn't talk about it. Every once in a while he would get a call from some long-forgotten cousin or distant uncle, and a somber look came upon his face. As their petty grievances drone on and on, sometimes he would just sharply cut them off, demanding a name. Then he trudged off to his room and locked it behind him. We didn't see him for the rest of the day. I only know of one time my father wrote a name in for himself. When I was a boy, my mother was killed by a drunk driver. She was jogging in the late afternoon, and a plastered trucker swayed too far to the left and pinned her to a tree. My mother lay splattered on the hood of the gnarled truck as the driver, a man named Arnold, limped away begging for help. He was arrested, of course, but evidently there was some mistake the police made. Something about the chain of custody being tainted, and the case was thrown out. Imagine that, murdering a woman and not even batting an eye after the fact. He never once looked ashamed of his actions. He looked more annoyed than anything, like my mother had just gotten in his merry way. My father was beside himself with grief, of course. I could hear him wailing long into the night as he hid himself away. The various cousins had flocked to our house like gulls, offering sorrow in one hand and a hefty plate of pasta in the other. I didn't think they were callous. It was just their way. My Uncle Tony had clamped a gorilla hand on me and pulled me in, muttering it was going all be okay. His breath had a lingering smell of sambuca and cigar smoke. We were sitting in the living room, our clan chattering amongst themselves, leaving my father to his torment alone. They grieved for her, my mother, I know they did. Yet they treated her wake as one big family reunion. In the corner, I heard some of my Tanner cousins slurring at each other in the tongue of the motherland. In the kitchen, I heard the crazed yet harmonic voice of my Uncle Corrado in the kitchen, serenading his wide-eyed nieces and nephews. Uncle Tony could see the miserable look upon my face and gave me a loving smack in the head. "Hey, don't look so miserable, my boy. Your mother is gone, but the family? It'll always be here for you," he said through puckered lips. "Don't you worry either. That son of a bitch is gonna get his." He warned, a tiger's grin forming on his face. "You mean the—" Uncle Tony cut me off with a finger to his lips and a firm grasp on my back. "We don't talk about it here, Bad Karma. It'll be taken care of. That's all you need to know. Let me ask you something, though. How does it work?" I whispered to him, leaning into the man despite wafts of drink and bad cologne emitting from him. "Suppose you'd have to ask your pop about that. he said after a moment. He took a sip from his drink, a long one. Have my theories, of course. We all do, he admitted quietly. I perked up at this. To be honest, I always just assumed someone within the family took care of things, I admitted uneasily. This got a hearty laugh out of Tony. Christ, kid, you think we're a... He tapped his nose. No, come on, we're a lot of things, but we're an honest bunch. We ain't connected like that, he stated plainly. The thing with the book, I don't know how it works other than magic, kid. Gotta be. Keeper of the ledger has gotta be a warlock or something like that, using the old Italian black magic on people. Tony slurred. A crazy explanation, and one I would hear at least twice more that night. After I left Tony's charming embrace, I went around and casually asked about the ledger to others. Some laughed it off, others hushed up real quick. Few cousins even thought we were connected after all, said the ledger was a hit list for those who owed certain people too much money. Others said the ledger was a myth, a family fable to make us feel better during hard times. That didn't account for the deadly results of the myth, of course, but they dismissed it as bad luck. In face, that's what some others said as well, that we were blessed and others purely unlucky. I heard it all. Blood magic, a pact with a demon. Ask any member of my family and you would get tangled in a web of conspiracy. The only common answer was, your father would know better. That night I decided I would ask him about that solemn task. The rest of the evening was spent with the comfort of relatives and array of pasta and meat. The fridge looked like it had been fully staffed by an olive garden, and the aroma of herbs and garlic clung to the air in desperation. Soon enough I was alone in the house, save my father who was still holed up in his room. It was a deadly sort of quiet in that house, the kind where you can't bear to be alone with your thoughts. I tiptoed up the winding stairs towards my father's room. Stopping at the top, I called out to him. The silence slapped me in the face. My father's door was shut tight, yet I could see light creeping out from the bottom. I approached the oak wood door with a sudden caution, worried that my father had decided to join my mother wherever she rested. I crept towards the door like an unwanted intruder, and to my surprise it creaked open ever so slightly. Light slashed my face, and I winced at the sudden flash of white lightning. I peeked inside and stood frozen at the impossible sight before me. My father sat on his bed, clutching his silk sheets like his life depended on it. His head, frosty with age yet full of hair, was titled upward. His eyes had seemed to roll back into his head, his ghostly whites looking out into nothing. My father was engulfed, no embraced, by a massive pair of feathered wings. The feathers shined bright in the dark, like diamonds shooting out the most blinding light imaginable. The angelic wings were attached to a massive yet slender figure kneeling down behind him. It had to be 9 feet tall as is. I couldn't imagine how large it was standing up. It had flowing golden hair, each strand as bright as a 24-carat star. It dangled its arms over my father's shoulders, like it was straddling an old friend. The arms had these circular growths on them, oval-shaped yet glassy. It was only when I saw the being's face did I realize what those growths were. The being had soft eyes, 8 pairs of them on the face. I could make out no nose or mouth. The being simply had eyes all over. They were white with golden iris placed perfectly in the center, like it had been sculpted by a master craftsman. The longer I looked at this being, the less frightened I became. My fear slowly melted away and was replaced by a soothing voice in my head. It simply told me, "Be not afraid." It was an androgynous voice, yet I swore I could hear the silky tones of my mother's voice in it. I clasped my mouth as tears started to form, yet I knew not why. The eyes on the celestial's arms began to awake, and I felt their curious views on me. The being tilted its head towards me, studying me. That uneasy feeling began to return, like I had seen something I shouldn't have. "Go now, child," the voice commanded softly. "It is not your time yet." The voice was sympathetic, yet oddly harsh. My father stirred slightly, and the being turned its attention back to him, soothing his strained mind. I backed away from the door, my eyes aching from the glow. I rubbed them and stumbled into my own room, ignorant of the thing I had witnessed. I collapsed onto my bed, and the slumbering world stole me into itself. I awoke late into the next day to the sound of my father whistling a merry tune. He knocked on my door and came in, a plate of eggs in hand and his phone in the other. He sat down next to me, offering me both without a word. On the screen was a breaking news story. Arnold Weaver, the man who had murdered my mother and walked free, had been killed. The man had been out celebrating his legal victory at a bar of all places. Early morning he had stumbled out when a neon sign above him collapsed from its scaffolding directly onto the man's head. It had killed him instantly. There were no pictures of the body, simply a cordoned off-street corner and a photo of a cop carrying away the bloody sign. It was a thick neon picture of a beer bottle, the bottom heavy with blood. My father looked pleased in spite of himself. I noticed some wrinkles around his eyes, like he had aged 5 years in one night. I asked him if he was tired, brushing past the news. He smiled sadly and said he was. Using the ledger for yourself takes more out of you than it normally does. But it was worth it, he explained. Dad, I looked into your room last night and I began eagerly, but taking one look into my father's eyes was all I needed to clamp shut. Don't worry about that just yet, Leo. I heard you were asking everyone at the wake last night. He spoke softly. I'll tell you all you need to know for now. The ledger was a gift to our family generations ago. It was meant to protect us and avenge us when it failed. Of course, you've heard some of the things your cousins have asked for. That man at Cousin Sarah's job who got the promotion over her, for example. He scoffed, then winced at the memory. The keeper cannot refuse a request, you see, no matter how abusive the use of its power can be. It takes a part of you every time, Leo. My father died young, as his before, and I'm sure I will as well. There we shall be judged, and I just hope they will look upon us with mercy. He grasped my hands. Do you understand what I'm telling you here? I nodded my head, and to be honest, even now I don't fully grasp it. He accepted my lie, and we went about our days like nothing had happened. This was 6 years ago now, and today is the day I buried my father. It was an aneurysm, or so I'm told. It came for him while he was sleeping. Probably didn't even feel it. We should all be so lucky, my Uncle Tony had said as he gorged himself on wine and pasta. A man pulled me aside during the funeral and explained my father had left me a locked box and a small sum of money as part of his will. He had the box in hand, and I didn't even have to open it. I tucked it away in my coat jacket and thanked the man, who disappeared into the crowd. I felt ill after that and started to leave. An arm caught me as I was out the door. I turned to see my Aunt Rita, her chalky face hidden by a vial of sorrow. She followed me to my car, saying how sorry she was Vincent had passed and how it was the cherry on top of her week. There was new neighbor at her condo, you see. She was young and taken to partying late into the night. Sometimes it would be 10, even 11 p.m. before the music finally died down. She said she wished Sarah Larson had never moved next door to her. She gave me a cold look as she said that, and a peck on the cheek as she said her goodbyes. I just stood next to my car, a sinking fear in my chest I hadn't felt in 6 years. So now I sit in my room, ledger in hand. I stare at the thousands of names etched into this tome. The paper has become cracked and wrinkly. It reeks of mothballs and dust. I have just finished adding the newest name, and now I wait, I suppose. I await the coming of the being, this guardian that has watched our family squander its power over petty grievances. My father was right in the end. I can only hope we aren't judged too harshly.